Chapter 551, Slave's Inheritance. The underground dojo was submerged in darkness, and as soon as Sunny willed the drop of ichor to manifest itself into reality, that darkness suddenly came to life. Countless shadows moved and danced around him, forming an invisible whirlpool. Their movements were strange and erratic, fraught with anticipation, excitement, and longing. Slowly, golden sparks of light appeared in the air in front of him, and then shot toward a single point in space, coalescing into a small radiant dot. However, the memory did not appear yet. Instead, more and more sparks flew into it, thousands upon thousands of them, until at last it seemed as though wide streams of brilliant golden light were constantly flowing into the slowly growing sphere of radiance. This continued for almost an entire minute, and when the sparks finally disappeared, a brilliant drop of golden liquid was floating in the air in front of Sunny. It was suffused with a beautiful light that didn't seem blinding, but was somehow able to illuminate the entire expanse of the dojo. However, there was also something dark about the shining drop of divine blood, contrasted against its golden radiance. The shadows around him were now suddenly much deeper, darker, and starkly pronounced. All their movements ceased, as though they were frozen still by awe and reverence. That is Shadow God's blood, all right. Sunny forced himself to look away from the drop of ichor and summoned the runes describing it. He had to make sure that his guess was right. Tense with anticipation, he read, Memory drop of ichor. Memory rank, unknown. Memory tier, unknown. Memory type, unknown. Just like the last time. Not surprised. He lowered his gaze and studied the string of runes that were his real goal. Memory description. Before there was only boundless, eternal void. From that dark abyss the unknown were born, just like chaos itself. They were endless and everlasting, vast and forever changing. But then came desire, and with it came direction. From it, the gods were born. When gods appeared, the void was not eternal anymore. When gods appeared, the darkness was not endless anymore. When gods appeared, the chaos was not orderless anymore. The gods appeared and brought with them war. This drop of divine blood was spilled by Shadow on one of the battlefields of that war before the void was bound. Sunny stared at the runes, flabbergasted. That was a lot to take in. So unlike the unknown were indeed a type of creatures. Primordial beings that existed before time, space, and even death itself, in a boundless dark void. And the gods were different from them, but also their kin. At least it was clear now what terrible enemy the gods had faced, long before the daemons and their rebellion, and why Shadow God had been compelled to create death. How else would they be able to defeat eternal creatures? Were time, space, and other concepts Sunny had always thought to be absolute also created as weapons in the war of the gods against the unknown? At least it was easy to tell which side had emerged victorious. However, the most frightening detail was that the description never said that the primordial void had been destroyed. Only that it had been bound. Was it still bound, now that the gods were dead? Sunny shivered and shook his head. The short description contained a vast amount of information, which had an even vaster amount of implications. He couldn't encompass all that in a small span of time. Maybe after I consume the drop, I'll learn more. He hesitated, then glanced at the radiant drop of golden liquid once again. Immediately the spell spoke. This time, however, its voice did not sound subtly excited. Weird. You have acquired a drop of ichor. Do you wish to consume it? Sunny sighed, remembering the agony of the previous 2 times he had decided to snack on a piece of divinity. Then he gritted his teeth and said, Yes. So be it. What is that supposed to? The golden drop suddenly separated into 3 equal parts, which then shot toward his chest, abdomen, and head. The radiant droplets entered his 3 shadow cores and disappeared, dissolving into the darkness of his soul. Sunny flinched. A already? The shadows surrounding him exploded with motion, and at the same time, the darkness inside of him seethed. He felt something entering his bloodstream, a cold and unfamiliar energy that brought with it both pain and euphoria. This is it. It's starting. He lowered himself to the floor, preparing for the torturous process of transformation. The cold energy spread through his entire body, reaching every corner of it. It surged, on the cusp of assimilating into the very essence of his being. And then, something strange happened. Sunny opened his eyes wide in shock and horror. As the lineage of Shadow God flowed through his veins, blood weave suddenly surged too. But its behavior was not at all normal or caused by Sunny himself. It was acting of its own volition and felt full of ominous, dark intent. And hunger. What? He was prepared for indescribable pain, but the pain never came. Instead, he could feel the cold energy being hungrily and ruthlessly devoured by the blood weave, like it had been starving for thousands of years. What the hell is happening? A sudden spasm ran through his body, and Sunny fell down with a short yelp. Inside of him, two forces were fighting for control over his very being. One was the lineage of Shadow God, and the other was blood weave. And despite the fact that one was complete and came from an actual divinity, while the other was fragmented and incomplete, the forbidden inheritance of Weaver was winning. It was like a savage beast that sunk its teeth into the soft flesh of its prey and refused to let go. Stop, what are you? And before he knew it, it was all over. The cold energy of Shadow God's lineage was gone, and blood weave was back to its usual self, peaceful once again, as if nothing had happened. Peaceful, but yet stronger. As Sunny stared into the darkness in absolute shock, there was no announcement of him acquiring a new attribute. Instead, the spell said with a hint of dark satisfaction in its voice, "Blood weave has evolved. Bone weave has evolved. Ember of divinity has evolved. Your memory has been destroyed." Sunny remained silent for a long time, and then let out a furious, outraged scream. "Weaver, you bastard." Chapter 552, September. The autumn was in full swing. Out in the waking world, the skies were gray and the winds were turning cold. The trees were showering the wet ground with a fragrant carpet of dead leaves. But under the boundless, lethal expanse of the sky above, the world was still warm and bright. On an especially large island, one covered with emerald grass and moss-covered ruins, a frightening nightmare creature was stalking its prey. It had 4 mighty paws, a lean body covered in black fur, and a wide maw full of sharp fangs. Above it, 2 furious red eyes burned with hatred and madness. The abomination noiselessly moved through the tall grass, approaching the source of loud noise. A human's voice was screaming, full of indignation. "I'm right here. Come and get me, damned bastards. Curse you all." The creature snarled and prepared to jump. Before it could, however, a slender arrow fell from the sky and hit the abomination right in the eye, instantly killing it. "You have slain a fallen beast, Black Ravager. Your shadow grows stronger." Several hundred meters away, safely hidden in the shadows cast by a fragment of an ancient wall, Sunny lowered his bow and frowned. The happy shadow jumped up and down several times, then turned to him and applauded. Sunny looked at it, his frown turning into a scowl. "What do you mean, great shot? I was aiming for its leg, you idiot." Dejectedly shaking his head, he threw the bow on the ground and growled. It had been almost 2 months since the day he had gained, and promptly lost, the lineage of Shadow God. But Sunny's mood was still in shambles. He had spent most of this time training Rain and learning how to use a bow. By now, his aim wasn't terrible, but it was also not nearly as impressive as what he had seen Kai do. The fact that his archery was improving so slowly only added to Sunny's frustration. He wasn't using Morgan's warbow, of course, reluctant to be seen with a memory awarded to Mongrel, even if no one except for the terrifying master knew what exactly that memory was. People could recognize the brand of clan valor on its surface, which would lead to a lot of questions. Instead, Sunny was training with the Blackhorn bow, which Saint had used to wield back when he had been too weak to handle nightmare creatures populating the Chained Isles without her support. Sunny stared at the bow in question and suppressed the desire to give it a good kick. Dismissing it with a sigh, he retrieved the cruel sight from where it had been thrust into the ground and headed in the direction of the slain abomination. Compared to when he had just arrived on the Chained Isles, Sunny was much stronger now. He had a vastly better arsenal of memories at his disposal, an additional shadow core, and a third shadow. and his combat mastery was polished by hundreds upon hundreds of bloody battles. Additionally, after the damned and forbidden, rightfully so, lineage of Weaver had swallowed the drop of Shadow God's blood, three of his attributes evolved. The Ember of Divinity was now Flame of Divinity, raising his divine affinity even more, which also increased the durability of the undying chain. Blood Weave and Bone Weave had not changed in name, but became much more potent. Sunny was now much harder to break and kill. He probably couldn't bleed to death even if he wanted to, and it would take a saint or someone like Master Morgan to shatter his bones again. That was something at least. Commanding the ordinary rock to shut up, he picked it up from the ground, hid it on his belt, and walked over to the carcass of the Black Ravager. The creepy shadow slowly turned its head and stared at the carcass with disturbing fascination. This guy. Sunny rolled his eyes. "Don't just stand there, pervert. Come here and help." The shadow eagerly wrapped itself around the blade of the prowling thorn, which was then used to cut the tough hide of the dead nightmare creature. Sunny swiftly fished out the soul shard and threw it to the covetous coffer, which hopped into the air and swallowed it with a metallic click. Usually that would be it, but today Sunny needed to retrieve something else as well. Grimacing from time to time, he cut several large slabs of meat off the carcass, wrapped them, and threw the bundle over his shoulder. Should be enough, right? Finally done with the gruesome task, he stood up, picked up the cruel sight, and headed toward the southern edge of the large island. This island was a bit special, and for a good reason. Once Sunny reached its end, he saw a breathtaking sight. Far away and below him, the scattering of floating isles was no more. Instead, solid ground stretched as far as the eye could see, covered by a patchwork of forests, meadows, marshes, rolling hills, and glistening ribbons of rushing rivers. A dark, bottomless abyss stretched between the edge of the island and the rest of the dream realm, and those rivers fell into it, creating grandiose waterfalls. Near to where he stood, a ruined fortress rose from the ground, and from its gates, a colossal iron chain, many times thicker than the giant chains connecting the isles together, extended into the abyss, connecting to the soil on the other side of the dark chasm. This was one of the anchors of the chained isles, and the road by which Awakened traveled here from the lands to the south, which belonged to the great clan Valor, as much as anything could belong to humans in this realm of nightmares. Sunny glanced at the sun, then got busy making a fire. By the time strips of meat were roasting over the coals, two figures finally appeared on the colossal chain. A small smile appeared on Sunny's face, one of the few sincere ones he had shown in the past 2 months. Effie and Kai had finally reached the chained isles. Now, all of them were here. Chapter 553, Gracious Host. Effie and Kai climbed over the rubble of the shattered gateway and entered the crumbled fortress. Both were tired and covered in layers of dirt, their armors dented and their weapons nicked. The travel to the very edge of the explored lands had not been easy. Even though they had made stops and rested at human citadels along the way, it took a lot of strength, endurance, resolve, and a bit of luck to reach the chained isles alive. However, both raised by wolves and Nightingale were calm and vigilant, their eyes sharp, their hands steady. They were ready to face any danger. Luckily, there were no enemies inside the ruin. Instead, several nightmare creatures lay dead on the ground, some of them cut to pieces, some strangely lacking any wounds, but utterly broken, as though something terrifyingly powerful had crushed their bodies with inhuman strength. The shadows suddenly moved, and a split second later, Kai already had his bow drawn. However, Effie gestured for him to lower it. Out of the shadows, a tall and graceful figure in elaborate black armor stepped out, two ruby flames shining behind the visor of her helmet. In one hand, she wielded a steadfast kite shield forged out of dull steel, and in the other, an austere sword, its blade still dripping with rancid blood of the slaughtered abominations. Kai cautiously studied the menacing creature. "Is that Sunny's echo? She looks different?" Effie grinned. "Yeah, she does that sometimes. Hey there, beautiful. Where's your sneaky boy master?" The taciturn demon tilted her head a little, stared at Effie for a few moments, then silently turned around and walked away. "I guess we should follow." The three of them left the crumbling fortress and walked along the edge of the island. Soon, the heavenly smell of roasting meat reached their nostrils. A few seconds later, Both Effie and Kai froze, their mouths hanging open. A fire pit was built in the shadow of an ancient wall, strips of juicy, generously seasoned meat roasting over the coals. But that was not all. There were also fresh vegetables and succulent fruits, a copper sazve producing the unmistakable smell of freshly brewed coffee, and a few more things that people very rarely saw in the dream realm. The person responsible for all this revelry was sitting in a comfortable folding chair, lazily enjoying a slice of melon. When he saw them, an impish smile appeared on his face. "Oh, hi guys. You finally made it." With that, the young man jumped out of the chair, reached into a pot full of ice, and then placed 2 frosty bottles of cold, expensive beer into their hands. Sonny grinned. Welcome to the Chained Isles. Sometime later, Effie and Kai had satiated their hunger and were resting with dreamy expressions on their faces. Sonny had given up his folding chair and was now sitting on the ground. He was inwardly lamenting the fact that covetous coffer was not large enough on the inside to fit several, at least not yet. Maybe after he becomes a master, things would be different. Kai took a sip of his beer and glanced at the branded bottle in his hand with a funny expression. "Sonny, how do you even have all this stuff? Are you on such good terms with the White Feather clan?" Sonny laughed. "Nope, I delivered all these things here myself." "What? You have forgotten about my brilliant emporium already? It seems that Aiko had not hounded you for an endorsement hard enough, or maybe too hard, and you're suffering from trauma-induced amnesia? I mean, you are basically a co-founder. The first deal I ever made was with your help, remember?" Kai smiled. "Those terrible memories you asked me to buy on your behalf in the castle? Yeah, I do." Sonny nodded with enthusiasm. "My operation might seem small compared to what you two have seen in Bastion, but here on the Chained Island, I am the most successful entrepreneur. I guess it's true what they say about business. You know, you have to find the right people in the right wells, or something like that." The charming Archer blinked a couple of times, but didn't comment. Effie, on the other hand, did. Finishing her beer, she glanced at the empty bottle with regret and sighed. "Sonny, I have a serious question. Think about it before answering. Take your time too. Will you marry me? No, seriously. I am reformed. I swear I won't tease you anymore. I won't even mind you having a girlfriend. Just continue supplying me with all this stuff." He sneered. "No, denied. You shameless gold digger." Effie made a disappointed face, then threw her head back and laughed out loud. "Oh, well, all right then." Then, she grew a little bit more serious and asked, "So, what's the plan? How do we proceed from here?" Sonny sighed, then took out his map of the Chained Isles and placed it on the grass. Effie and Kai got closer and studied it attentively. He pointed to the southernmost point on the map and said, "We are here. First things first, we need to get you to the Sanctuary of Noctis, which is about 3 days of traveling away, and get you anchored there. White Feather Clan patrols this route routinely, so we shouldn't run into anything too troublesome." Then, he pointed at a particular island marked with an image of a burned tree. "After you are settled, we'll go check up on the firekeepers and their progress on the ship. They won't be finished repairing that thing for at least a month more, from what I've heard, so you'll have to spend that time well, Hunt. Saturate your cores as much as you can, search for better equipment." Effie nodded. "What about you and Cassie? Are you well prepared?" Sonny hesitated, then nodded. "I am reasonably prepared, Cassie. I don't know, but the two of us have another task to accomplish before the ship is ready to set sail." He pointed to the very north of the Chained Isles, to a dark island that was almost touching the foreboding slopes of the Hollow Mountains. "There is something we need to retrieve from the Night Temple. If all goes well, we'll travel north and come back within a month. If it takes longer, we will rendezvous here." His finger landed on the shipwreck island. "And challenge the seed. That's the gist of it. Don't worry, though. We'll talk everything through in detail before Cassie and I leave." Effie and Kai glanced at each other. "Sounds like a plan." Sonny nodded, then glanced at the setting sun. "Good. Rest well tonight, then. We'll set off in the morning." Winter was drawing closer and closer, and the closer it got, the more nervous he became. Chapter 554, Coming Clean. On the way back to the sanctuary, Sunny tried to impart as much knowledge about the Chained Isles as he could to Kai and Effie. The archer, in particular, needed to go through a tough adjustment. His main combat tool was his ability to fly, which was obviously restricted in this strange land. Looking at the clear blue sky with a bit of trepidation, Kai asked, "So that crushing, how deadly is it?" Sunny grimaced. "Deadly enough to kill a saint, but it is also situational. After a bit, you'll develop a sense of how high or low the island you're standing on is. When it is at its lowest point, like right now, you will probably be able to rise several hundred meters into the air before feeling any pressure. The exact margin depends on how long the chains of the island are." He paused, then continued. "However, when it is ascending or descending, you'd better either stay on the ground or not fly more than a dozen meters up. And if it has already reached the peak, well, you really should have already escaped to another island. But if you failed to do that in time, lay on the ground and pray. If the chains are short enough, you will survive." Kai studied the sky above some more, then looked down. "What about below the islands? Can I fly freely there?" Sunny nodded. "Theoretically, yes. The sky below is generally safe. There's just nothing there. But that is only true for its depths. The underside of the islands is actually much more dangerous than their surface. The creatures that dwell there are the true horrors of this place. Some of them stay put. Some move through the darkness as they hunt and migrate between islands. So flying under the islands is lethal in its own way." Effie was less concerned with the crushing, since her mighty constitution allowed her to withstand it on par with someone like Master Roan or Sunny himself. She was, however, very interested in all the kinds of nightmare creatures that populated the region. The huntress was determined to finish saturating her core in the month left before their departure. Sunny shared all the knowledge he had about the inhabitants of the Chained Isles. He had spent many months fighting local abominations, so he knew a lot: which creatures frequented which island, how they attacked their prey, what their weaknesses were, and so on. He also knew which islands had to be avoided at all costs. By the end of their journey, even Effie seemed impressed by the amount of knowledge he had accumulated. I guess the Academy doesn't pay you for nothing. You really did do a lot of research." Sunny grinned. "When I hunt nightmare creatures, I get to sell their shards, and also get paid by the research faculty. So much money. Ain't it a dream?" She giggled. "The wonderful thing about you, Sunny, is that you are very easy to please." What is that supposed to mean?" Effie, meanwhile, looked east and asked with a bit of tension, "What about the saint who rules this region? What's your opinion of her?" Sunny thought for a bit, then said with uncertainty, "Skytide. She is a bit of a recluse. I don't really know, but her husband is a really decent guy, so that earned her some points in my book." Effie smiled lightly and didn't continue the conversation. On the third day, they finally reached the sanctuary. Due to how high-profile both Raised by Wolves and Nightingale were, the trio was invited to have a meal with Saint Tyrus before visiting the gateway. The dinner was pleasant enough, but when the plates turned empty, the real conversation began. Saint Tyrus looked at Effie and Kai with her usual expressionless severity and asked, "I was surprised to hear that 2 more of the most brilliant awakened of the new generation had decided to visit my remote and unremarkable citadel. If you forgive my bluntness, to what do I owe the pleasure?" The 3 of them glanced at each other. They had discussed what to say in advance at this point. There was no reasonable way to keep their intentions secret, so it was easier to just let the cat out of the bag. Kai smiled politely before answering. That smile of his was charming enough to make a crowd of women faint on the spot, but Skytide did not even blink. "We came here with the intention of challenging a nightmare seed. Sunny, awakened Sunless discovered one not too long ago. Since the seed is years away from blooming and doesn't pose a threat to the waking world at the moment, he didn't inform you. Please forgive him that transgression." Master Roan frowned. "There is a seed on the Chained Isles." "Where?" Effie pointed down. "To reach it, we'll have to descend into the depths of the sky below. Song of the Fallen will also be joining us. We plan to use that ancient ship the Firekeepers are repairing." Rowan blinked a couple of times. "Well, how extravagant. At least that explains a few things, I guess. St. Tyrus lingered for a few moments, then asked evenly, "Are you sure that you want to enter a second nightmare? It has been less than a year since the four of you awakened. Most people take much more time to prepare for the rigors of the spell's trial, and even then many don't survive." A wild smile appeared on Effie's face. "Sure, yes, I guess we are sure, as much as anyone can be." The decision to challenge the seed was not made rashly, nor was it based on blind ambition. You are right, of course, but the circumstance of our awakening was not ordinary. Even though it only happened recently, between the four of us, we already share a decade of battle experience, and the battles we fought were not soft. Skytide did not answer immediately, turning her face away to look at the vista of the chained aisles. Kai cleared his throat. "Are you going to try and dissuade us, my lady?" Tyrus remained silent for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. "No. If four awakened with the SSA designation want to challenge a nightmare seed, they must know what they're doing. Your timing is actually good as well." Sunny frowned slightly. Good timing? What does she mean? But Skytide wasn't going to elaborate. Instead, she looked at Effie and asked, "When do you leave?" The huntress shrugged. "Cassie and Sunny have an errand to run in the Night Temple. So, we'll depart as soon as they return." Tyrus shifted her gaze to Sunny. Was he imagining things, or did her expression become darker? "You are going to the Night Temple, Sunless?" He nodded. "Yes. It is a part of our preparations. Why?" The beautiful saint remained silent for a few moments, then said simply, "Be careful to strictly follow the rules while you're there." Sunny politely agreed. Inwardly, though, he was a bit disturbed. Well, that did not sound ominous at all. Cassie, too, had seemed a bit apprehensive about the Night Temple. Just what kind of a place was it? Chapter 555, Best Served Cold. A few days later, a delicious aroma was slowly spreading through Sunny's home. He was currently in the kitchen area of the first floor, whistling an upbeat tune as his hands juggled several cooking utensils. There were several pans and pots simmering on the stove, and a scattering of fresh ingredients on the countertops around him. Ah, this smells so good. Taking a step to the side, he produced a strange knife out of nowhere and started slicing and dicing the vegetables, the triangular blade moving so fast that it turned into a blur. Rain, who was tasked with peeling the potatoes, gave him a long and dark look. "Sunny, not to doubt your honesty and professional integrity, but how exactly is this a part of my training? Are you sure you're not just using me as cheap labor?" "No. Wait. It's not even cheap. I'm actually paying you." Without stopping what he was doing, Sunny looked at her and frowned. "Why, of course. I am very sure also. Is this how you handle a blade? By gods, you just sliced half of that poor potato off and threw it into the sink. It's called peeling, not destroying, you know. Where's your finesse? Where's your precision? Control that knife better. These things are very expensive." Rain stared at him with burning resentment for a few moments, then sighed heavily and continued peeling the potatoes. Sunny grinned. Effie, who was watching him cook with a wolfish expression, gulped. "So, it's not ready yet?" His eyes twitched. 40 seconds, damn it. That's how long ago you asked the same question. For the 100th time. What do you think changed since then? Effie opened her mouth to retort. But at that moment, the doorbell rang. A sadistic light suddenly gleamed in Sunny's eyes. "Oh, I wonder who can it be?" He glanced at Rain and said nonchalantly, "Rain, go see who it is." The teenage girl blew a strand of hair out of her eyes, wiped her hands on her apron, and glared at him. "What, I am your doorman now too." Grumbling, she put the knife down and went to the door, then opened it. Sunny observed her with keen interest. Rain looked up, revealing that the unexpected visitor was quite tall, and then suddenly froze. Her face paled so much that it turned almost entirely white, and her pupils became as wide as saucers, her mouth hung open. It was as though the girl was paralyzed by horror. Sunny weighted the heavy kunai in his hand and walked over. As he walked, a strange sound escaped Rain's mouth. N. A tall and ridiculously attractive young man was standing on the porch, looking at her with a polite and friendly smile. His hair was auburn and absolutely gorgeous, and his electric green eyes were nothing short of stunning. He was dressed in simple but exquisitely stylish clothes, holding fashionable sunglasses and a face mask in one of his hands. "Oh, I am so sorry. I must have come to the wrong house." Even his voice was charming and velvety, causing one's ears to tingle. Rain was finally able to force out a word, her voice a panicked squeal. "N night." Sunny gave her a short look, shook his head, then smiled at Kai. "Hyung, you're here. Sorry the dinner isn't even ready yet. Come on in. Come on in." Kai returned his smile and came inside. Sunny raised a hand and poked Rain in the back, then narrowed his eyes and said with exasperation, "Rain, why are you just standing there? Get my Hyung some slippers quick." Then he turned to Kai and sighed. "So sorry, that's Rain, a girl I tutor. She is a bit slow sometimes." Kai glanced at her, two lethally cute dimples appearing on his cheeks. "I am sure that is not true. It is very nice to meet you, Rain." She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but no words came out of her mouth. Sunny waited for a couple of moments, then shook his head again and bent down to push a pair of house shoes to Kai. "Make yourself at home. This is the living room. I'll be over there in the kitchen area for a bit. But please, for the love of gods, can you distract Effie? She's driving me crazy." Kai laughed, patted him on the shoulder, and went in to greet the hungry huntress. Sunny and Rain were momentarily left alone. The teenage girl breathed heavily for a few moments, then slowly looked down at her dirty apron and hands with pieces of potato peel stuck to them. An expression of utter horror appeared on her face. Then she looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Sunny, why is why is night in your house?" He blinked a couple of times, pretending to not understand the question. "What do you mean? Kai is a dear friend of mine. We're practically brothers, one might say. What's wrong with you today?" Sunny shook his head in derision. Rain stared at him in shock, then opened her mouth to say something. However, before she could, the doorbell rang again. Sunny calmly opened the door, revealing a petite, exquisitely beautiful young woman standing on the porch. She had delicate features, pale blonde hair, and stunning blue eyes. Despite the fact that the young woman was dressed humbly, there was an aura about her that made it almost impossible to look away. It was as though she was a pristine heavenly creature that had somehow found her way to the dirty, imperfect, mundane world. In her hand, she was holding a long white cane. Cassie hesitated for a moment, then turned her head a little, facing Sunny. "I hope I am not late." Rain stared at her with a ghostly expression. Song of the... Then she turned to Sunny as well, her eyes even wider than before. Poor thing, looked as if she was about to faint. Sunny smiled brightly. "Ah, finally, vengeance." Chapter 556, about those potatoes. Kai, Effie, and Cassie settled in the living room and chatted while Sunny returned to the kitchen. The two areas were basically a single space, separated only by distance and a tall counter, so he could see them clearly. Watching his friends at ease and happy to be reunited with the blind girl turned his expression dark for a short moment, but Sunny quickly put on a carefree mask. Rain was by his side and staring at them too. Her gaze lingered on Kai for a while, then on Cassie. Finally, she looked at Effie and studied her face with a complicated expression. "Here it comes." A few moments later, her eyes widened. Sunny didn't think that it was possible for the teenage girl to become paler than she already was, but he was proven wrong. Looking like a ghost, Rain slowly turned to him and whispered, "Effie, she's..." Sunny offered her a polite smile. "Huh, what are you mumbling about?" Then he glanced into the living room and raised his eyebrows. "Oh, do you want me to call her over?" "No problem. Hey, EF." Rain waved her hands and pressed one against his mouth. "No, don't." Sunny stared at her with a silent question in his eyes. The girl looked at him, then at her hand, then awkwardly stepped back. "What I wanted to say was, Effie, is she?" Sunny grimaced. "Awakened Athena, also known as raised by wolves? What, You didn't know. Rain suddenly swayed and grabbed the counter to balance herself. A comically mortified expression appeared on her face. Really, he couldn't blame her for not recognizing Effie. The girl wasn't that interested in the awakened to begin with, and the government mostly used the heroic visage of raised by wolves as she looked in the dream realm, mighty, tall, and brimming with vitality in their propaganda. It wasn't easy to match that image with the weak, gaunt, and sickly young woman who was bound to a wheelchair. Not to mention that a normal person would never expect to meet a famed hero in their backyard. Still, looking at Rain now was incredibly funny. But she and I, oh gods, I even said, oh no, oh no. She lowered her head, then suddenly looked up and pierced Sunny with an unexpectedly furious gaze. Damn it, Sunny. Why are you friends with Raised by Wolves, Nightingale, and Song of the Fallen? They are famous people. He frowned in confusion, then shrugged. So what? We used to be members of the same cohort. Rain blinked a couple of times. Her voice became even quieter. But Song of the Fallen, Raised by Wolves, and Nightingale were members of Lady Changing Star's cohort. Sunny smiled innocently. Oh, yup, that's the one. The girl lifelessly sat down, almost missing the chair. She remained silent for a long time, then asked slowly, Sunny, you know Lady Nephis, the Lady Nephis, Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan? You're from her cohort? He grinned. Who, Neph? Yeah, sure, I guess. Rain closed her eyes. Sunny did not say anything for a bit, then cleared his throat. He waited for a few more moments, then said gently, So about those potatoes. She flinched, looked down at her apron again, then answered weakly, Oh, sorry, actually, I have to go home. I forgot to do homework. Sorry. With that, Rain stood up and rushed to the door. Sunny yelled at her back. Hey, what homework? It's Saturday. Without turning around, the teenage girl squealed, sorry one more time, and fled the house in a panic. Sunny watched as the door closed behind her and laughed. He felt avenged. He felt wonderful. Ah, priceless. That was priceless. I do wish she would finish peeling the potatoes first, though. After the dinner, the four of them settled around the table and moved on to the real reason for today's gathering, the discussion of their plan to challenge the Nightmare Seed. This conversation could have taken place in the sanctuary, but despite having a somewhat good relationship with the White Feather clan, Sunny didn't want to say some things aloud in their territory. Their territory was also a sovereign's territory after all. So, the cohort had made plans to meet in the waking world. There was a lot to discuss. The second nightmare was a deadly challenge, and they had to be as prepared to face it as possible. There were also a lot of preparations to be made for the journey to the seed itself, venturing into the sky below and locating the rift in the ocean of flames that hid in its depths was not an easy task in and of itself. So, they spent many hours going over every little detail, sharing knowledge, and finding solutions to potential problems they could encounter. The nightmare itself was a mystery, of course, so no matter how much they tried to account for every possibility, they still had no way of knowing what awaited them inside. All they knew was that it would be dangerous, deadly, and terrifying. Still, there were things they could do to improve their chances, grow stronger, improve their arsenals, but most importantly, aim for maximum flexibility in the collection of tools at their disposal. After all, it was not the strongest who survived, it was the most adaptable. It was already deep night when the conversation stopped. It seemed as though they had discussed everything they could, at least for now. Sunny made a pot of coffee for everyone, poured it into the cups, and sat down opposite Cassie. Now that everything else is settled, let's talk about the Night Temple. The more I hear about it, the stranger I feel. Isn't it supposed to be just a private citadel of clan valor? What's the deal with it? Cassie remained silent for a bit, then took a sip of coffee and sighed. Night Temple? How do I describe it? It is an eerie place. The first thing you need to know, I guess, is that it's actually situated on the underside of the northern island and not on its surface. In the eternal shadow, that makes it harder to access, but also more defendable. I doubt that even an army of nightmare creatures, or awakened for that matter, would be able to take it by force. She paused, and then continued. At first glance, it's a frontier outpost for the Knights of Valor, a transfer base that was supposed to serve as a staging ground for their push further north during the active expansion of the previous decades. But, as you know, after humans encountered the Hollow Mountains, our progress in that direction stopped. Night Temple remains, though. Sunny frowned. So it's basically empty? Cassie lowered her head. When she spoke, her voice sounded tense. Logically, it is supposed to be, but it's not. Chapter 557, Night Temple. Cassie chose her next words carefully. Despite the fact that the Hollow Mountains were designated as a death zone, it seems that Clan Valor still has ambitions of exploring them. Perhaps that is why Night Temple exists and why a saint is stationed there. Sunny frowned. Even Kai and Effie seemed to be perplexed. I thought Skytide was the only saint on the Chained Isles. The blind girl shook her head. No, there is another. Saint Cormac. He oversees the citadel and ventures into the mist of the Hollow Mountains from time to time, as though searching for something. In fact, that was how I was able to receive permission to anchor myself and my cohort in the Night Temple. In exchange, I was meant to use my aspect to aid him in the exploration. But nothing much came of it. Sunny thought for a bit, then said, So far, everything sounds reasonable? Cassie nodded, then shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, but there are just too many strange things about that citadel, ones that have nothing to do with the saint and his mission. For one, there are just too many awakened there, around 100, I think. That is much more than is needed to support one saint. However, the most eerie part is not their number, but who those awakened are. She hesitated, then said somberly, With the exception of 2 masters who serve as Saint Cormac's lieutenants, all of them are lost. Sunny perked up. What Cassie had told them was indeed strange, and more than a little bit disturbing. There weren't that many lost among the awakened, so why would 100 of them be gathered together in a remote and isolated citadel? But that wasn't the reason why Sunny was suddenly excited. Leaning forward a bit, he asked, Oh yeah, is there one called Mordred? Cassie thought for a few moments, then shook her head. I don't know. We weren't really allowed to interact with the lost while living in the Night Temple. You see, the whole citadel is separated into 3 areas. The outward ring is where we were given a space to establish a base. We were forbidden from entering the temple itself, unless escorted by one of the masters. That is where the lost live and the gateway is situated. She suddenly fell silent, and then added in a darker tone, But there is another area inside the temple too, one that even the lost aren't allowed to enter, the inner sanctum. One time while we were entering the gateway, I felt the doors of the sanctum open and accidentally glimpsed the people guarding it. The blind girl shivered. Or at least they seemed like people, but they weren't. They were all echoes, human echoes. Sunny scowled. What the hell? One human echo was creepy enough, but many? What exactly were they guarding that actual humans couldn't? No, that wasn't important. Clan Valor could keep its secrets. He just needed to get the knife from the altar. So, what about an altar? Have you perceived an ivory knife lying on it? Cassie lingered for a few moments, then shrugged. The gateway in the Night Temple is different from the one in the sanctuary. You don't need to touch the altar to activate it. So I've only felt the altar from afar. It is indeed cut from a slab of black stone. From what others told me, there is a statue of a veiled woman holding a star and a bolt of lightning behind it. Other than that, I can't say. Sunny sighed, a bit disappointed. Well, doesn't matter. I'm sure it's there. The problem is to convince the representatives of Clan Valor to let me approach the altar, or even sneak to it when no one is looking. Do you think you'll be able to convince them to let me inside? The blind girl nodded, but there was a bit of uncertainty on her face. I think there won't be a problem, although I wasn't able to help Saint Cormac a lot. We parted on good terms. However, that whole place is very mysterious. I am reasonably sure that they will at least allow us to anchor ourselves to the gateway, but Sunny didn't like the sound of that. But what? Cassie sighed. Performing a ritual over the altar is another matter entirely. They can also simply refuse to let us in. I doubt that this will happen, but just in case we should be prepared. The day we leave the sanctuary might be the last time we'll have access to a gateway before the second nightmare is over. Sunny grimaced. Although he hated to admit it, She was right. It was best to prepare for the worst. He had a few things to do in the next few days. Then, "All right, then we will leave in 2 days. Make your preparations, and I will make mine." Cassie nodded and fell quiet. In that silence, a strange sound could be heard. Sunny turned around and saw Effie noisily devouring the leftovers of their recent dinner. Noticing that he was staring at her, the huntress froze. "What? You guys were busy, and I was hungry." He covered his eyes for a moment, then shook his head. This woman. Speaking of preparations, he had to do something right now. "Hey, Kai, come here and give me your hand." Kai looked at him with a silent question, but didn't ask anything. He stood up and walked over, then stretched one hand over with a smile. Sunny put one finger on it and sent two memories away with a regretful sigh, the blackhorn bow and the full quiver. Effie was well equipped with powerful memories from her time on the Forgotten Shore and from the months she had spent hunting as an awakened, but the charming archer lacked good armaments. Even though it pained Sunny to let go of two ascended memories, he knew that this was for the best. It was going to give Kai an opportunity to grow stronger in the next month and be better prepared for the nightmare, plus he still had Morgan's warbow and the strike of thunder. Kai frowned in confusion, then stared into emptiness, clearly reading the runes. Then, an excited light ignited in his eyes. "Oh, thank you, Sunny." Sunny scowled. "Now don't get me wrong. This is not a gift. I am lending them to you, you understand? Brilliant Emporium is a respectable business, not a charity. I'll be expecting a full repayment or an exchange of equal value in the future. Got it?" Kai beamed and looked at him with a wide smile. "Oh, that's so sweet." Sunny's scowl deepened. "Sweet? What does he mean, sweet? What's wrong with this idiot? I just told him that he's now in debt." The sun was already rising, and that meant that they had to part ways. Each had a lot of things to do. When everyone left, Sunny stared at the table full of empty plates for a while, and then sighed. Somehow he felt that they won't be able to have a nice dinner like this for a while. Chapter 558, One Last Lesson. It was already morning, so he didn't bother going to sleep and just brewed himself more coffee, poured it into a cup, and went to sit on the porch. The mental fatigue of the long planning session made his thoughts a bit slow, but Sunny knew that he would be able to remain awake and lucid for a couple more days without any problem. He wasn't going to return to the dream realm until all his business in the waking world was taken care of. So Sunny just rested for a bit, watching the dawn and unhurriedly thinking through all the things that had to be done. Say goodbye to Teacher Julius. Talk to Aiko about the Emporium. The second nightmare could take a lot of time to conquer. So there was a question of how long the supply of soul shards he had given her would last. Sunny didn't want to return and discover that his store had closed doors and lost all its clients. He took a sip of coffee and looked down. Of course, there was a very real possibility that he would not return at all. Sunny did not delude himself. No matter how powerful he was and how swift his progress had been, this nightmare was going to be nothing except for absolutely deadly, like all nightmares were. Better people than him had ventured inside and never returned. The possibility of death was very real. Was there even a point in planning for the future? As he thought about it, suddenly a sound of light steps could be heard on the path leading to the porch. Sunny smiled a little and then looked up. Rain was standing a few steps away, looking at him with a bit of awkwardness. Are your guests still here?" He shook his head. "Good. I mean bad. I just wanted to talk to you alone, that's all." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what about?" Despite the fact that Rain was obviously trying to be apologetic and respectful, a familiar angry light ignited in her eyes. "You know what about. I mean, sorry." She stumbled, remained silent for a few moments, and then asked in a more polite tone, "Why didn't you tell me that you are a big deal?" Sunny stared at Rain for a bit, then smiled. "Have I not told you that I am probably the strongest awakened in the world? The best of best and all that? I think it happened right here on this spot." Rain scowled. "I'm being serious." Sunny took a sip of coffee and looked at her for a few moments. Slowly, the smile disappeared from his face. Finally, he sighed and looked away. "Because I'm not, As far as awakened go, I am not a big deal at all. In fact, I am very small and easily squashed, so I don't like to advertise my prowess. It's best that everyone thinks of me as weak and stupid. That way, I'll be much harder to kill." Rains looked at him in confusion. I don't understand. How would nightmare creatures know that you are considered strong? Why would that put your life in danger?" A dark, sad smile appeared on Sunny's face. He glanced at Rain, and then asked, "Who said anything about the nightmare creatures?" Sunny put his cup on the floor, then said, "After you left, you must have searched the network for all the information about the Forgotten Shore you could find, right?" Rain blushed, and then nodded. He nodded too. "Then you must know that around 400 sleepers died during the siege of the Crimson Spire. So many. But do you know how many were killed in the months before? Almost twice that." Her eyes widened slightly. Sunny looked at the young girl, no levity in his voice anymore. "And they weren't killed by the nightmare creatures, they were killed by people. So, ironically, more humans were killed by other humans while I was out there, in that hell, than they were by monsters. Well, other monsters, to be precise. And that is a lesson you're going to have to learn, if you want to become strong." He sighed. "I can teach you how to hold a sword or a spear, how to traverse the dream realm and not starve, and how to kill your enemies. But I can't teach you how to be strong, Rain. That is something that you can only learn yourself. This world, it is a cruel and ruthless place. Some people are lucky enough to never learn its truth, but some do. And out of those, soft ones never survive. You are very, very soft, but are you lucky? I don't know. It's up to you." She listened to him attentively, an expression that was a bit too serious and somber for a girl her age appearing on her face. After a while, she said, I think I understand." Sunny smiled. "I hope that you do. But also, a part of me hopes that you don't." He hesitated, then took out his communicator. "Oh, and by the way, our lessons are going to have to stop for a while. My friends and I are going on a big expedition, you see, and I'm not sure how long it is going to take. Don't worry, though, I have already taught you enough for you to continue practicing on your own. Do it diligently and don't get lazy. If you feel that you mastered everything before I return, call the number I just sent you. It belongs to a friend of mine. Her name is Aiko, and she'll find you a new tutor." Rain stared at her communicator for a long time, then looked at him and asked quietly, "You are going on a big expedition?" Sunny showed her a carefree smile and shrugged. "Sure, why?" She hesitated for a few moments, and then asked, her voice suddenly uncharacteristically timid, Will it be dangerous?" He picked up his coffee, took a sip, and then shrugged again. "Dangerous? Yeah, of course. Really dangerous, I guess. But anything having to do with spell is." Rain looked at him with sudden intensity, her previous timidness gone. When she spoke, her voice rang with tension. "Then why? Why are you going?" Sunny looked at her in bewilderment, and then suddenly threw his head back and laughed. When he was done laughing, he glanced at her and said with an amused smile, "Why, the same reason you wanted to train? To become strong. Really strong." Chapter 559. No One Path. Some time later, Sunny was waiting in a cafe, looking out of the window at a lively street outside. People were rushing past, in a hurry to get inside before the heavy clouds covering the bleak sky erupted with rain. The subtle smell in the air told him that this was going to be a bad one, maybe not toxic enough to burn through clothes, but still unpleasantly hazardous. The acid rain didn't bother Sunny too much, since it was something everyone was accustomed to. Even in the outskirts, people knew how to avoid getting caught in one. Here, in a prosperous part of the city, citizens had many more protections. What he was thinking about was the street itself. This was the same cafe he used to visit when observing Rain, and the same street that had become a scene of panicked evacuation during the gate incident several months ago. Armored vehicles of the government had torn apart the road, and several violent skirmishes had spilled into the peaceful surroundings. And yet there were no signs of the furious battle left. The road was long repaired, and the battle damage mended. The cafe was open again, and people went on about their business as though nothing had happened. They had endured the disaster and moved on, showing the astonishing resilience the human race possessed. Not even the nightmare spell could overcome it. At least it had not managed yet. Sunny sighed and glanced at the pastry in front of him. At that moment, the door of the cafe opened, and the familiar sensation of phantom cold enveloped him. Master Jet looked even more disheveled than usual, her uniform jacket actually sporting several small holes, their edges charred. However, she looked just as relaxed and strong as ever, her icy blue eyes radiating fierce energy. She seemed dead tired, but also somehow brimming with life. Jet looked around, noticed Sunny, and offered him a smile. Then she flicked a few flakes of soot off her epaulette, walked over, and crashed on the chair. "I hope that this pastry is for me," he smiled, and pushed the plate and a cup of fresh coffee toward her. Of course. Master Jet took a bite out of the pastry, closed her eyes in delight for a few moments, and then cradled the cup of coffee in her hands. After a while, she looked at him and sighed. "So, second nightmare, huh?" Sunny simply nodded. Soul Reaper Jet was the only Ascended he knew well enough to trust a little, so he had asked her to meet him, hoping to receive some advice. Nothing he could read on the network, or even in the staff library of the Academy, could be as valuable as talking to a person who had actually conquered a seed once. She took a sip of coffee and shook her head. "Crazy kid." A slight smile appeared on his face. "Kid, I am not that much younger than you." "Well, I think." Jet glanced at him with a dangerous grin. "Are you asking me about my age? Damn. I guess I haven't slapped you in a while." The two of them stared at each other for a few moments, and then laughed. In truth, Sunny knew that Master Jet was in her late 20s, so the age gap between them was not insignificant. Considering how much had happened to him in the past 2 years, 10 seemed like a lifetime. But at the same time, he wasn't a kid anymore, not by a long shot. He looked down, thought for a few moments, and then said, "Now is as good a time as any. I thought things through before deciding to challenge a seed. This is for the best." She studied him for some time, then nodded. "I see. Well, there are a lot of benefits to being an Ascended. There are certain drawbacks, too. But you don't need to worry about that for now. Right now, you need to concentrate on surviving the nightmare." Sunny smiled. "My thought exactly. So is there any wisdom a venerated elder like you can share with this ignorant junior?" Master Jet glared at him, then took another bite of the pastry. "Elder? Maybe I really should slap you." She lingered for a few moments, then sighed. "The second nightmare. It is a lot like the first, but at the same time very different. The spell will send you and your cohort into an illusion of the past, one centered around a central conflict. To conquer the nightmare, you will have to resolve that conflict, one way or another. There is no right or wrong way to do so. You just have to end it somehow." Jet fell silent, as if remembering her own trial. Her icy blue eyes stared into the distance. "That won't be easy, of course. Your friends might die. You might die too. But you know this already. Let's talk about the differences then. The first one is rather obvious. The nightmare will be larger, longer, and harder than your first one. The nightmare creatures populating it will be of higher ranks and classes, usually either awakened or fallen. But if you're unlucky, you might meet a corrupted one too." Sunny grimaced. His first nightmare had pitted him against an awakened tyrant. What were the chances that he would get lucky this time and only encounter abominations within his ability to handle? Slim. Master Jet, meanwhile, continued. "The other difference is less talked about, but very important. Unlike the first nightmare, this one won't be tailor-made for you personally. You're smart enough to think through the implications of that fact on your own, but I'll mention one thing that very few people consider. The spell will try to find you a body that closely resembles your own, but due to what I have just mentioned, it might not be as similar as what one might expect." Sunny tilted his head and frowned. "How different are we talking?" She shrugged. "You will be of the same rank. That is certain. Your build will be more or less the same. But that's the thing, if you are unprepared, in a fight, more or less might cost you your life. A specialist has to rely on his or her body. It is our first and most important tool. Imagine that you are suddenly slightly higher or shorter. Your limbs are of a bit different length. Your center of gravity has shifted a little. Many people died because they weren't quick enough or couldn't adapt to that sudden change. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment. For a fighter, their body was like a well-oiled machine that they knew in and out. They knew every detail about it, how it moved, how it performed in any given situation, what it could accomplish and what was beyond its ability. All battle techniques were finely tuned for that precise machine. Changing its parameters was like throwing a wrench into the mechanism, potentially causing its collapse. He had not known that detail. Luckily, now that he was informed, he would be able to prepare and shorten the adjustment period as much as possible. Thank you. That is a very valuable piece of information. Master Jet shook her head. It's not like it's a secret. People just don't think about this stuff. She hesitated, then said in a darker tone, "The last large difference, hopefully. You won't have use for that knowledge. But if worse comes to worst, it is better to be prepared." Sunny looked at her and raised an eyebrow. What? She glanced at her cup, took a sip, and then carefully put it on the table. The thing is, I said that there is no one way to conquer the nightmare. That means that some solutions can contradict each other, and people participating in the trial are not forced to aim for the same result. He scowled. What exactly are you trying to say? Master Jet looked him in the eye and said, her voice cold and grim, I am saying that not all challengers have to be on the same side. That rarely happens, but you should keep that in mind anyway. Sunny stared at her for a few moments, then turned away. He wondered what she wanted him to realize. Was Master Jet warning him that his allies could betray him and turn into another obstacle he would have to overcome to escape the nightmare? Or saying that he could betray them if needed? They talked for a while, discussing various matters having to do with the nightmare seed and the trial itself. Sunny acquired a lot of useful information, as well as several pieces of valuable advice. But throughout the whole discussion, he continued thinking about that one statement. Rarely happens, but you should keep that in mind anyway. Chapter 560, Pawns of Fate. Sunny left the cafe and caught a train to go visit Ayoko. After that, he traveled to the academy and said his goodbyes to teacher Julius. The old man was a bit emotional to let him go, but did not try to dissuade his unruly pupil. Instead, he tried to offer encouragement. The second nightmare, Putui. No student of mine can be killed by a mere second nightmare. Don't you dare put a stain on my reputation. Sunny, my boy, you hear me? Finally, Sunny left the sleeper compound and stood outside for a while, watching the setting sun. Then he turned around and headed deeper into the academy complex. The room where Nephis slept did not change much. He replaced the flowers on one of the tables and sat down, looking at her pale and motionless face. No matter how many times Sunny came here, seeing her like this brought a dull pain to his chest. The cauldron of emotions burning in his heart was too deep and seethed too furiously for him to understand it. Sunny was never good with emotions, after all. There was resentment, longing, guilt, affection, fear, and hope. Looking at the transparent lid of the sleeping pod, he sighed. Hey, Neph, just like before. This was the only thing he said out loud. He lingered for a bit, and then thought, You are still alive out there somewhere. That is good. That makes me happy. It really does. You know, right after everything happened, I wasn't sure if I wanted you to live. I thought that maybe it would be better for you to die. Sometimes I did. Sunny lowered his head and closed his eyes tiredly. But after a while, as time passed, I started to miss you more than I wanted to be free of you. Maybe what Master Jet said is true. Maybe no one is really ever free in this world. Maybe the only freedom there is the freedom to choose your own chains. A dark smile appeared on his lips. But that is the thing, isn't it? Even that choice was taken away from me. By you, by Cassie, by fate. I never had anything, and then I had even less than that. Wouldn't you be angry to be dealt a hand like that? Because I am so angry. And that is why I am never going to stop trying to break free. Screw truth and screw fate. Who said that its chains can't be broken? Sunny shifted slightly and stared at the sleeping young woman with burning intensity. I just have to get strong enough to rip them apart. You want to destroy the spell? Well, I want to destroy fate itself. Which one of us do you think is more crazy? He suddenly laughed, his voice full of both mirth and bitterness. If Weaver did it, why can't I? And if Weaver created it, why can't you break it? If that is our will, who dares to stop us? Sonny smiled widely, and then grew quiet again, his eyes full of darkness. After a while, he rubbed his face. Anyway, Cassie and I are going to challenge the second nightmare soon. We might not be able to visit you again for a long time. So you take care of yourself, Neff. Don't disappoint me. I am counting on you to stay alive, to keep me striving to surpass you. With that, he sighed heavily, stood up, and left without looking back. It was finally time for him to sleep, too. Before climbing into his luxurious sleeping pod, Sonny had a conversation with Effie. He moved her pod into the underground dojo and installed it near his own. The two of them were most likely going to spend a long time in the nightmare, so the house had to be put on lockdown for the duration. Hopefully Sonny would be able to do it himself after coming back through the gateway in Night Temple. But if things went wrong with the representatives of Valor, Effie was in charge of making the final preparations. He gave her the passwords from the security system and explained the procedure. Then, Sonny ran the diagnostic on the pod, made sure that it was functioning perfectly and could sustain his body for months, if not years, and sighed. It didn't matter, really. After entering the seed, he would either die or become a master. If the former happened, the well-being of his physical body was a moot point. If the latter happened paradoxically, the same statement applied. Ascension merged the physical body with the spirit body, however. Even if the physical body was completely destroyed, the process would create a new one. So, maybe, it was more appropriate to say that Ascension allowed the spirit body to become corporeal. In any case, the result was the same. That was why Effie wanted to become a master so badly, knowing that it would make her as strong and healthy as she was in the dream realm. Why many of the Lost dreamed of challenging the second nightmare as well. And that was why it didn't matter even if the sleeping pod malfunctioned and thoroughly roasted Sonny's physical body instead of preserving it. If the nightmare didn't kill him, he would be as good as new. Still, Sonny was very attached to his mortal shell. He didn't want any harm to come to it, if only out of sentimental reasons. With a sigh, he undressed, took one last glance at his spacious dojo, and climbed into the pod. Effie, who was watching him silently from her wheelchair, strained to raise a hand and waved him goodbye. Sweet dreams. Sonny wanted to snarl at her and remind the gluttonous huntress to not leave dirty dishes all over the house, but he was just too tired. As soon as the lid of the metal sarcophagus started to move, his eyes closed, and he fell into the deep, dark embrace of sleep. When Sonny opened his eyes again, he was already in the sanctuary of Noctis. Sonny was standing on the edge of the island, looking at the heavenly chain that stretched far into the distance. His body was clad in a slender armor forged out of bleak steel, and in his hand was a somber black spear with a polished silver blade. Cassie was standing by his side, wearing her midnight blue coat beneath a polished cuirass. Her hand rested on the hilt of the quiet dancer, and an elegant half-mask rested on her face. A few strands of her long golden hair were blowing in the wind. They were ready to depart. Sonny glanced at the two of them, then at the dull steel of the undying chain. He wasn't foolish enough to fail to recognize that this was exactly how her vision of their death happened, with the two of them alone, and him wearing metal armor. The only thing missing was the snow. But Sonny didn't care. He had been deceived by the knowledge of the future once, and all his desperate attempts to avoid it had only helped the vision happen. This time, he was not going to allow himself to be a pawn of fate. He was going to do what needed to be done, in a way he wanted to do it, and face the consequences without regret. Sonny sighed, glanced at Cassie and said, "Let's go." With that, he took a step forward and plunged off the edge of the island. Chapter 561, Journey to the North. When they started their expedition, the last vestiges of summer warmth were leaving the Chained Isles. Not every region of the Dream Realm had seasons that were the same as those of the waking world, but this one was somewhat similar. By the time they were supposed to reach Night Temple, autumn would be in full swing. If everything went well, the journey was going to take 2 or 3 weeks. Sonny wanted to reach the mysterious citadel and retrieve the ivory knife by the middle of October, then rendezvous with Effie Kai and the firekeepers at the shipwreck island in the first days of November. That would give them almost a full month to reach the Ebony Tower and enter the Seed before winter. Of course, in the dream realm, one could never put too much faith in any plan. Sunny felt reasonably confident in his ability to travel across chained isles, but he knew not to get arrogant. This was a wild and deadly land, one full of fearsome creatures and insidious threats. He had explored many islands and hunted down many abominations here, but even after 9 months of fighting and traveling across the region, Sunny was only well acquainted with the southeastern part of it, where the sanctuary of Noctis was located. He had never ventured west or north of the tier. The situation was only made worse by the fact that the closer one got to the vast emptiness at the heart of the chained isles, the more dire dangers they would face. To reach Night Temple quickly, Sunny and Cassie had to reach the tier and skirt around its edge, which meant that they would be moving through the most perilous area of the entire region. Not all was bad, though. Cassie had some of the knowledge that Sunny lacked, since the firekeepers had spent a lot of time in the northern reaches of the Chained Isles. He also had all the information copied from Mordret's map, which contained a detailed description of many places they were going to have to travel through. He was strong enough to face the dangers that awaited them there, and Cassie wasn't defenseless anymore. The two of them were enough, most likely. These were the reasons why Sunny had decided to attempt the expedition without a full cohort. The following days proved that he had been right in his decision. Their journey was surprisingly smooth. The traversal itself provided no problems. Cassie was more than capable of moving from island to island without his help, which was a relief. Due to her second aspect ability and the quiet dancer, the blind girl was able to move through space with an adequate measure of accuracy. As it turned out, she also had an ascended charm that provided a powerful augmentation to a single echo, which she used on her rapier. With its help, the dancer could carry her weight for a short distance, which allowed Cassie to get to and off the chains with ease. The only drawback of the charm was that it ate through her soul essence rapidly, and she couldn't use it often, or for too long. Of course, traversal was the least of their problems. As they traveled further into the heart of the Chained Isles, more and more nightmare creatures picked up their scent. That was where Sunny came in. With the help of Saint, and, when needed, the Soul Serpent, he was able to deal with anything that dared to attack them. Cassie helped too. But there was rarely anything for her to do. Sunny and his shadows were just too swift, cunning, and deadly. Their combined power was almost terrifying. That was not to say that the blind girl was useless. On the contrary, her presence was perhaps the single most important factor of why they were able to move toward their goal with such ease. Her great affinity to revelations, keen senses, and supernatural intuition complemented Sunny's battle prowess perfectly. It was almost disturbing how well they worked together. Him scouting ahead and obliterating monsters, her guiding them through the maze of shifting aisles in a way that took them past the true horrors, the hidden hazards, and the crushing. The strangest part about all of this was that they didn't even talk to each other that much, yet were able to achieve such a deep level of understanding. Most of the journey was spent in silence, with both of them preferring not to speak to another unless absolutely necessary. There was no small talk, no irrelevant conversations, and no friendly banter. Sunny didn't even talk to his shadows and Saint like he was already used to, which made the silence almost suffocating. It was indeed a bit awkward in the beginning, but then he got used to it. He actually started to enjoy the peace and quiet, as well as the company of another human being, even if it was Cassie. Their cooperation was efficient, seamless, and not burdened with emotions and other troublesome complications. An alliance of pure convenience. What was there to complain about? They traveled across islands that were barren and stark, and across islands that were lush with beautiful verdure. Across islands that teemed with vile abominations, and islands that were full of nothing but bones and ash, across islands that were open and vast, and islands that were small and hid unseen dangers behind a veil of deception. It wasn't long before a day arrived when a dark line became visible far away, over the northern horizon. When Sunny first saw it, he stood motionlessly for a while, looking north with a dark expression. The Hollow Mountains. After so long, he finally saw them again. Every day after that, the black line grew bigger and closer. Soon he was already able to discern individual peaks and the jagged shape of the mountain chain that pierced the sky like the fangs of a colossal dragon. And on the day that the dark peaks towered above, shrouded in flowing mist, they finally reached Night Temple. Chapter 562, Into the Night. The chain swayed lightly as Sunny and Cassie walked across it, rattling loudly from time to time. Since the island that they had just left was currently ascending, the one in front of them was below and fully visible. The northern island was not too large, maybe 2 kilometers in diameter. Its surface was one vast level plain and covered entirely by a beautiful field of violet flowers, as if wrapped in a silken mantle. Despite the fact that the sun was high in the sky, the buds of the delicate flowers closed. From what Cassie had told him, Sunny knew that they would open only at night, emanating an eerie and beautiful light. He would have liked to witness that strange and magical sight himself, but right now, there were far more important things for them to do. Not to mention that, at the moment, Sunny's attention wasn't even on the island itself. Instead, he was looking past it, at the draconian peaks of the hollow mountains that towered above the island, submerging it into their vast and deep shadow. They were shrouded in white mist that flowed slowly down the dark slopes and fell into the black abyss of the sky below, like an endless wall of white, swirling clouds. The image of it was both magnificent and frightening. It was as though the sky itself was slowly being devoured by the lightless void, or maybe invading it. Looking at the dreadful mountains, Sunny couldn't help but wonder if Nephis was currently lost somewhere out there in the white mist, or had she not dared to enter it and instead chose one of the other directions. There was no way to know. With a sigh, he looked down and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. Soon they reached the northern island and flew up, Sunny with the help of the prowling thorn and the dark wing, Cassie by unsheathing the quiet dancer, jumping and holding tightly to the hilt as the flying rapier pulled her into the air. The two of them landed softly amidst the delicate flowers and looked around. Without the need to say anything, Sunny allowed the blind girl to take the lead and followed her as they walked toward the only landmark on the island, the ruins of the ancient fortress that perched precariously on its northern edge. It was very similar to the crumbled stronghold where he had met Effie and Kai. Trying not to disturb the flowers, they crossed the island and entered the fortress. Nothing attacked them on the way, and there were no sounds except for the whistling of the wind and that of their footsteps. The northern island was beautiful, silent, and strangely peaceful. Looking through the broken gateway of the ancient stronghold, Sunny studied the colossal chain that anchored the isles to the hollow mountains. The swirling mist flowed down on both sides of it, obscuring the point where the chain sunk into the dark stone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then shivered and looked away. At the very corner of the platform that lay beyond the gate, almost unnoticeable, a narrow set of stairs led down, cut from weathered rock. The path snaked around the overhanging slope, clinging to the stone surface as it led to the dark side of the island. Cassie put one hand on the stones and, tracing her fingers across them, cautiously stepped onto the stairs. Sunny followed, looking down with a dark expression. The path leading to the Night Temple was long and narrow. There was barely enough space for 2 people to walk side by side. To his right was the stone wall of the island, and to his left was the bottomless dark abyss of the sky below. One careless step could spell a person's doom. The placement of the stairs was not accidental as well. If an attacking force tried to lead an assault down the path, they would have had to fight the defenders one at a time, with the movements of the fighter's right hand being restricted by the slope. Ranged attacks wouldn't help much due to the curvature of the wall, too. In a place like that, one warrior could stop an entire army. They descended lower and lower, finally reaching the dark side after a long time. At the point where the slope turned almost completely horizontal, the stairs transformed into a strange hanging bridge that was attached to the stone surface above by rusty chains. It swayed precariously above the dark chasm of the sky below, leading all the way to the center of the aisle to the Night Temple. Sunny froze, startled by a mournful sound of a loud bell that suddenly rolled through the darkness. In front of him, at some distance, a magnificent structure protruded from the underbelly of the floating island. Made out of black stone, it resembled a tall, somber cathedral that was somehow built upside down and hovered above the abyss of impenetrable darkness. The foundation was its highest point, and its 7 belfries descended into the depths of the black void, each ending with a short chain that held a massive bell cast of tarnished green copper. Since Night Temple was located under the island, the light of the sun never reached it. Instead, the cathedral was shrouded in eternal shadow, with only the pale shining of the distant divine flames caressing its black walls. In a strange reversal, the velvet darkness of the abyss and the scattering of false stars in its depths seemed like a vast night sky hanging above it. As Sunny watched, a second bell rang. He shifted a little and turned his attention to the narrow path, tracing its treacherous steps all the way to the massive iron gates of the cathedral. Cassie turned to him, lingered for a moment, and said, "Let's go, they've seen us." Sunny nodded and took a step forward. Night Temple waited ahead, its gates opened like a hungry mouth. Chapter 563, Lost Sentinels. As they walked toward the gates, Sunny asked quietly, "So, what happens now exactly?" Cassie thought for a few moments before answering. "I am not sure. That depends on whether St. Cormac is inside the citadel or out exploring the Hollow Mountains. In any case, my standing should be good enough to at least get an audience with one of the masters overseeing the temple in his absence." She hesitated, then added, "If we are allowed inside, there are several rules you must follow. Outsiders aren't allowed to summon any memories or echoes inside the citadel. We can only go into the allowed areas, unless a master is escorting us. We may not speak with the inhabitants of the temple unless they address us first. Additionally, all items we bring inside have to be inspected." Sunny frowned. The rules were not only strange but also strict and would put him at a disadvantage should anything happen. However, he remembered Sky Tide's warning. She told him not to break any rules inside Night Temple. "All right, I won't do anything risky unless absolutely necessary. Let's see how this plays out first." As they approached the ornate gates, 2 figures became visible standing on both sides of it. One was a man, and the other was a woman. Both sentinels were in their 30s and had calm, cold, dangerous eyes. So these are the lost. It was Sunny's first time meeting their kind. In truth, there was not much difference between them and those awakened who had not lost their physical bodies. That was not to say that the sentinels were ordinary. Both radiated an imposing, overbearing aura. Just from how the lost held themselves, Sunny could tell that they were extremely experienced and fearsome warriors. Their armors were perfectly crafted, and their weapons had a dangerous luster, all clearly of a high rank. The pressure these sentinels exerted reminded him of the oldest and most deadly hunters of the Dark City, those who had survived long years of bloody battles in the hell of the Forgotten Shore. If he was honest, he had to admit that most awakened anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis seemed like children when compared to the 2 lost. These people were no joke, and there were 100 more inside the cathedral, if what Cassie had told him was true. If all of them were the same as the sentinels. Sunny suppressed a shiver. He might have vastly underestimated the scale of the force that Clan Valor had stationed at the precipice of the Hollow Mountains. The somber cathedral hid an entire army. But why only keep the lost here? What purpose could it serve? The mystery had been tormenting him ever since he learned of it. At some point, one of the sentinels raised a hand, commanding them to stop. He studied both Sunny and Cassie for a while, and then said in a cold voice, "Lady Song of the Fallen, what a nice surprise to see you again. I hope that the other members of your cohort are well." His tone did not match the friendly words at all. The blind girl simply nodded. "They are well and in good health, anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis." The second sentinel raised an eyebrow and spoke. "Oh, what prompted you to make the long journey and return to our modest citadel then? In a company of a stranger and without your loyal comrades, no less." Cassie glanced at Sunny and smiled. "This is awakened Sunless, and he is not a stranger. In fact, he is a dear friend of mine, and one of the few people in this world I would trust with my life. Both of us used to be Lady Changing Star's companions." Sunny almost choked. Such smooth lies admirable. The blind girl, meanwhile, lingered for a moment, and then said, We hope to have an audience with Lord Cormac. The sentinels remained silent for a while, making Sunny feel a bit nervous. Finally, one of them answered, Lord Cormac is carrying out one of his missions. He won't be back for several weeks at least. Cassie's smile didn't waver. Without skipping a bit, she said, her voice as polite and pleasant as before. Sir Pierce, or Lady Wealth, then. The sentinels looked at each other. After a while, one of them sighed. Wait here. With that, he disappeared, leaving Sunny and Cassie under the heavy gaze of the remaining lost. Sunny stared back, shamelessly studying the sentinel. No matter how he tried, he couldn't tell the difference. She looked just like a normal awakened would in the dream realm. Well, it made sense. Her spirit body was the same, after all. It was also shaped very nicely. What are you staring at, boy? Sunny looked up and smiled. For a moment he was very tempted to answer honestly, but then his common sense won over. Your armor, ma'am. It seems like a fine memory. The sentinel snarled and didn't say anything. After some time, the second one returned and beckoned them to follow. They were led into a small, chilly room at the side of the gate and handed 2 sets of simple garments made out of crude cloth, then locked inside. Sunny stared at the bundle in his hands with a perplexed expression. What is that for? Cassie sighed and unbuckled her belt, then dismissed the quiet dancer and placed its empty scabbard on a bench. No memories or echoes allowed, remember? Sunny frowned, then glanced at his armor. If he dismissed it, he would be more or less naked. They are expecting us to change here. The blind girl silently turned her back to him. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then did the same. His shadow looked away too. Cursing inwardly, he dismissed the undying chain and felt the shadows in the tiny room shift as Cassie's cuirass and coat crumbled into a rain of sparks. They were close enough for him to hear the steady beating of her heart and sense the heat emanating from her body. Trying not to let his imagination wander, Sunny put on a pair of simple trousers and heard the fabric rustle as it slid across her smooth skin. Bastards, they couldn't give us 2 rooms to change? Suppressing his anger, Sunny put on a tunic and frowned. Its sleeves were too short to hide the coils of the soul serpent. More than that, they revealed the 2 shadows that were wrapped around his body, shrouding it in a thin layer of darkness. Not to mention that both the tunic and the trousers were several sizes too big for him. With a sigh, Sunny commanded the shadows to crawl up his arms, hiding them from sight. Then, he dismissed the serpent and bent down to roll up the pant legs and put on a pair of leather sandals and cleared his throat. Are you done? Cassie answered after a short pause. Yes. The clothes provided to her consisted of similar sandals and a long tunic that left her shoulders bare and her legs exposed below the knee. The silver half-mask was gone too, revealing Cassie's beautiful blue eyes. Sunny stared at her for a few moments, realizing that he had almost forgotten how they looked. Then, he scowled and banged on the door. Soon, the same sentinel let them out and led them through into the depths of the night temple. As soon as they left the gateway behind, Sunny tensed, as if expecting something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The sentinel glanced at him and frowned. What are you waiting for? Come. Sir Pierce will be with us shortly. Chapter 564 Inspection. The interior of the somber cathedral was as bizarre as its exterior. Sunny expected the actual floors to be constructed properly, and some of the corridors they walked through were, but other parts of Night Temple were upside down as well, the flat floors serving as ceilings and the arching ceilings serving as uneven floors. And that was just the outward ring. He didn't even want to imagine how the temple itself and the inner sanctum looked. As they walked, he saw several lost silently going about the mundane business of maintaining the citadel. They were dressed in the same crude clothes he was now wearing and wielded no weapons. However, every one of them, from a person calmly changing the oil in the wall lamps to a man sweeping the floors, radiated the same aura of strength and lethality as the 2 sentinels that had met them at the gate. They were all battle-hardened, veteran elites. Just what is this place? After descending a few sets of twisting stairs, Sunny and Cassie were led to another, slightly bigger room. That one had a large table in its center. The sentinel gestured at it and said, his voice not betraying any emotions, Sir Pierce is on his way. Please, present the items you brought from the outside for inspection. Cassie took a step forward and placed her belt and scabbard on the table. The Lost shifted his gaze to Sunny and waited. All my things are stored inside a memory. He considered hiding the existence of the covetous coffer, but thought better of it. There was nothing inside of it worth hiding, anyway. Or rather, almost nothing. The sentinel frowned, then said in a dark tone, "Summon it." Soon, the small box was sitting on the table. Sunny opened it and started producing item after item, slowly building a large pile. They were spices, cooking utensils, hygienic products, several packs of underwear, both male and female, which earned him a strange look, a piece of a broken mirror, a couple of soul shards, a folding chair, various snacks, packs of tea and coffee, and many more. As the pile slowly became larger and larger, the sentinel's face grew more and more incredulous. Finally, his eye twitched. "How much trash do you have in that box?" Sunny smiled. "Almost finished." He fished out a tube of sunscreen and several sticks of lip balm, threw them into the pile, then thrust his arm into the maw of the covetous coffer up to the shoulder. Ignoring the obsidian knife, weaver's needle, and skeins of diamond string, he swept its bottom a few times, and then finally took a step back. "That is all the trash I have." The Lost shook his head and started picking up the items one after another, inspecting them carefully. What he was expecting to discover, Sunny did not know. At that moment, the door of the room opened, and a tall man with sharp features and steely eyes came in. His dark hair was cut short, and there was stubble on his cheeks. The man wore a scale armor forged out of lusterless blue steel and held himself with the relaxed confidence of an experienced killer. Sunny didn't need an introduction to realize that he was standing in front of a master, and a powerful one, at that. Sir Pierce seemed to be less frightening than Morgan of Valor, but Morgan was barely older than Effie, while this man had a decade or two to sharpen his skill and accumulate battle experience. He was a knight of valor. Still, Sunny harbored no illusions in front of this monster. Neither Cassie nor he stood a chance. Especially not while surrounded by an army of 100 awakened elites. "Why am I thinking about this? We are here to talk, not fight," and they really needed this conversation to go well. Depending on how convincing they could be and how receptive Sir Pierce was, Sunny would either have to do things the easy way, the hard way, or abandon his plans to retrieve the second knife altogether. The sentinel greeted the master respectfully, and then continued to inspect the mountain of items Sunny had produced from the covetous coffer. Sir Pierce glanced at it for a moment, then turned to Cassie. "Awakened Cassia. Welcome back to the Night Temple." Cassie bowed slightly. "Sir Pierce." Sunny suppressed the desire to roll his eyes. "It's like I'm invisible." Both the sentinels and the formidable master had ignored his existence entirely, preferring to address the blind girl. Part of the reason must have been that they already knew her, but mostly it had to do with her status as a bearer of a true name. Well, it suited Sunny perfectly. He liked to remain as unnoticeable as possible. Sir Pierce and Cassie exchanged several pleasantries, slowly approaching the discussion of the real issue. Sunny listened attentively, knowing how much rode on this conversation. At some point, however, he got distracted. What was that? For a moment he thought that he heard someone sigh deeply behind him. No, he definitely did. But there was no one there. Sunny frowned. Am I hallucinating or... It was then that a familiar voice suddenly resounded in his ears. "Sunless, I am so glad that you made it." Sunny's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the sentinel, Cassie, and Master Pierce. None of them showed any sign that they had heard anything. Turning away, as if to stare at the wall, he hid his face and said in a barely audible whisper, "Mordred, where have you been, bastard?" His words sounded harsh, but his tone was actually elated. The voice chuckled, making Sunny feel a bit tense for some reason. Was it just him? Or did the mysterious prince sound a bit different? "Me? Oh, actually, I was with you this whole time, watching as you traveled across the dream realm. I just chose not to speak." Sunny blinked a couple of times. A heavy, cold feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. "You chose not to speak? Why?" Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then said in his usual pleasant tone, "With how cautious you are, I was afraid that you wouldn't come if I said too much." What? What does he mean? Sonny felt his heart beating wildly in his chest. His intuition was sounding the alarms, filling him a sudden feeling of dread. Fooled was I fooled? Come where? Here to the Night Temple. At that moment, the sentinel picked up the piece of the broken mirror from the pile. Mordred spoke again, his voice still friendly, but suddenly much colder and deeper beneath the surface, like a dark and restless ocean hiding under a thin veil of mist. "Indeed, thank you for bringing this piece of mirror to me, Sunless. I am very grateful." Sir Pierce casually glanced at the sentinel while responding to Cassie. His gaze stopped at the mirror. In the next moment his pupils widened. "And very sorry for what is about to happen next." The formidable master was suddenly near the table, the lost thrown aside. The piece of the mirror was in his hand. Throwing a wild look at Sonny, he screamed, "Where did you find it, boy? Answer me." Sonny took a step back, stunned. I. He remembered St. Tyrus telling him not to mention Reckoning Island. However, at the moment it seemed like Pierce would rip him apart if Sonny dared to twist the truth even a little. So he answered honestly, "Reckoning. I picked it up after slaying a strange creature." Sir Pierce stared at him for a moment, and then his face suddenly changed. It became deathly pale and motionless, as if aged by 10 years. His eyes grew wide and glassy. The fearsome master was terrified. But before any of them could do anything, a thin crack appeared on the shard in his hand, and in the next moment, all Sonny could hear was the sound of breaking mirrors. Chapter 565 Unleashed. Sonny flinched as the sound of shattering mirrors filled his ears. No one else seemed to react to it, though, and a moment later, as the cracked piece of glass in Master Pierce's hand exploded into a rain of shards, the sound abruptly disappeared. The fearsome man shuddered. "No. What is happening?" Sonny took a step back. Things were happening too fast, and he couldn't comprehend the situation yet. All he knew was that his heart was cold, and his mind was overwhelmed by a premonition of something ominous, dreadful, and disastrous happening. He had been fooled. He had made a mistake. Cassie shifted slightly, tilting her head with a tense and confused expression. In the next moment, Pierce swiftly turned to the sentinel, his face still pale and terrified, but now also full of grim resolve. His voice, which had been so confident just a few moments ago, now sounded panicked. "Seal the temple. Destroy the gateway. Go now. We can't let that thing escape." Sonny's eyes widened. Destroy the gateway? What the hell does he mean? And what thing was he talking about? The sentinel didn't seem to have these questions. Pierce's terror had spread to him like an infection, but the man simply nodded and darted out of the room without letting fear slow him down. Cassie took a step back to let him pass, then asked tensely, "Sir Pierce? What is going on?" As though reminded of their presence, the master turned around and threw a dark, menacing look at Sonny. "You." His voice shook with barely suppressed fury. "Crap." Sonny thought about summoning the cruel sight, but before he could even move, the tall man was already beside him, grabbing him by the shoulder. If it wasn't for the bone weave, Sonny's clavicle might have cracked from the terrible pressure. With his other hand, Pierce grabbed Cassie, causing her to yelp in pain. "I'll deal with the two of you later. There's no time." Next thing Sonny knew, they were being dragged out of the room. He threw a regretful glance at the pile of his belongings that was left laying on the table, stared at the covetous coffer for a moment, and then turned away. What to do, what to do? The situation was clearly out of his control now. Mordred had done something, had manipulated him to do something, and now the whole citadel was on high alert and furious with Sonny. Whatever it was that the mysterious prince had used Sonny to achieve, it was bad enough to terrify a master and justify the irrevocable destruction of a precious gateway. So, there were two questions. Should I try to fight my way out? And should I also be terrified of the thing that Mordred unleashed? Suddenly, another thought occurred to Sonny. Or is Mordred himself that thing? His heart grew even colder. There was not enough information to answer the second question, but the first one was rather easy. Sunny was strong, but not nearly strong enough to fight 2 masters and 100 deadly elites, especially not on their home ground. Plus, both he and Cassie had status. Even a great clan wouldn't dare to make them disappear without proper cause. I need more information first. Let's see how this plays out and make a move if the circumstances demand it. So, he didn't struggle as Master Pierce dragged them into the corridor. Outside the small room, the citadel that had been peaceful and somber before was now in a state of pandemonium. Several lost darted past them, their shadows dancing on the black walls in the orange glow of the ornate oil lamps. Sunny could see motion and sense hurried, but orderly movement in every direction. Unlike before, each inhabitant of the temple was now clad in armor and wielded deadly weapons. They were swift and disciplined, like professional soldiers that were preparing for war. And there was an army of them. But despite all that, was it nervousness he felt behind the facade of calmness the Lost showed? Master Pierce shouted at one of the sentinels, ordering him to stop, then pushed Sunny and Cassie toward the man. Lock these two up in the lesser cell. Sunny wanted to express his outrage, but before he could, the whole temple suddenly shuddered. A few moments later, a deafening sound wave rolled through the corridor. The gates, they have closed them. But it wasn't as simple as that. Since they were still in the outward ring of the citadel, his shadow sense had been somewhat able to reach into the emptiness beyond its outer wall. But as soon as the gates closed, that changed, as though the temple was now completely cut off from the outside world. It was now sealed with them inside. The sentinel silently grabbed the two of them and dragged them away. Staggering and trying not to fall, Sunny threw a glance behind his shoulder. The last thing he saw was a woman with beautiful red hair appearing before the fearsome master. She wore a simple black tunic and leather vambraces, her shins protected by a pair of greaves. The woman's face was grim and full of tension. Pierce, what the spell happened? A moment later, the two disappeared behind a turn of the corridor. This must be Master Wealthy. The Lost swiftly dragged them through the disorienting maze of corridors and stairs. They were descending lower and lower, most likely heading toward one of the cathedral's belfries. His expression was dark and severe, and for a good reason. Everywhere they passed through, the inhabitants of the Night Temple were busy preparing for battle. It was as though they were expecting to face a terrifying siege. The threat, however, didn't seem to be coming from the outside. Instead, most of the Lost were rushing deeper into the temple, toward its inner sanctum. It wasn't long before they heard screams. The sound traveled through the confusing interior of the cathedral in a strange manner. So it was hard to say from which direction the screams came. They seemed distant, and yet Sunny couldn't help but feel his blood run cold. These chilling wails were full of indescribable agony and terror. He knew the type too well. These were the screams that humans let out when they were not only horribly hurt, but also maimed, knowing that their lives were either over or would never be the same. The sentinel in charge of them stopped for a moment. His face grew ashen, and without saying a word, he continued to drag them toward a heavy metal door at the end of a long corridor. The Lost used an elaborate key to open the door, and then pushed them inside. Sunny and Cassie found themselves in a circular chamber that had a tall ceiling, or rather a tall floor, since it was built in reverse. The domed ceiling of the chamber was actually beneath their feet, sloping down like a deep crater. In the center of the cell, a large iron cage stood, each bar of it as thick as a man's arm. Strange runes were inscribed all around the cage, circling it entirely. What the? A moment later, the sentinel unceremoniously pushed them both in the backs, causing Sunny and Cassie to roll down the slope of the dome and through the door of the cage, which he then promptly closed. It locked with a loud click, cutting their way to freedom. No way. Sunny rose to his feet, turned around and watched as the Lost left the room and shut the door behind him. For a few moments they were left in absolute silence. The room was dark, with only a single oil lamp burning on the wall near the exit. Its orange flame trembled and danced, barely managing to keep the shadows at bay. Sonny gritted his teeth, then kicked the iron bars with all his might and screamed in anger and frustration. Damn it. Damn it all. Behind him, Cassie slowly stood up, then swayed a little. Sonny, he turned to her and snarled. What? The blind girl grimaced. Something is wrong. I feel. Sonny stared at her for a few moments, then blinked and looked outside the cage. The runes surrounding it were slowly starting to emanate an eerie, dangerous blue glow. Chapter 566, Imprisoned. Sonny looked at the runes. Their eerie glow was swiftly growing brighter and brighter, drowning the chamber in a ghostly light. Slowly, a deep frown appeared on his face. Then, suddenly, his eyes widened. Crap. But it was already too late. The runes shimmered, and in the next moment he felt his reserve of shadow essence plunging. It was as though something was draining the essence out of his soul with terrifying speed. At the same time, the range of shadow essence diminished even further, becoming limited by the size of the cage. The gloomy shadow recoiled, trying to get away from the shining runes. Sonny hurriedly tried to summon the cruel sight, but he was a second too slow. Before the spear could form itself from the sparks of light, his essence ran dry, and it disintegrated before assuming a physical form. Damnation. He looked helplessly at the bars of the cage and clenched his fists. This was indeed a jail cell built to contain awakened. Without shadow essence, he wouldn't be able to use Shadow Step to escape. More than that, he couldn't summon memories anymore. Manifesting them into reality demanded essence as well, even if it was a tiny amount. The same went for echoes and even shadows. He also felt weak, and was only going to grow weaker in the coming hours, without essence circulating through his body. Sonny's strength was vastly diminished. Whoever created this damned cage really knew what they were doing. With a resentful snarl, Sonny turned around and allowed himself to slide down to the center of the dome, where Cassie stood with a lost expression on her pale, delicate face. Raising one hand awkwardly, she tentatively moved it through the air around her and whispered, "I am blind again." Sonny frowned, stared at her for a moment, and then turned away. "You were always blind." Of course he knew what Cassie meant. Without soul essence, the aspect ability that allowed her to perceive the world from several seconds in the future was gone too. It wasn't exactly sight, but something that had replaced being able to see to her. His words might have been cruel, but Sonny was not in the mood for pleasantries. Being locked in a cage, powerless to escape, that was his worst nightmare, and he had no one but himself to blame for ending up that way. Turning away from the blind girl, Sonny sat down, lowered his head, and grabbed it with both hands. Curse him. Suddenly the cathedral shook again. Cassie remained silent for a while, then said quietly, "That must have been the gateway. They really destroyed it." Sonny closed his eyes. "I guess you are right." He heard her sitting down opposite him and wondered about the black altar that was now laying somewhere in the depths of the citadel in pieces. Was the ivory knife destroyed as well? Had there even been a second knife to begin with? Or was it just a lie Mordred had invented to lure him into the Night Temple? What else had he lied about? Sonny gritted his teeth, suppressing a groan. He felt scared, furious, and utterly humiliated. He had been so careful not to trust the mysterious voice after hearing it for the first time, but Mordred had been so helpful and had provided him with so much valuable information that proved to be true. Sonny was, most likely, only alive because of the lost prince's aid. Even so, he had never lowered his guard. If there had been the smallest hint that Mordred wanted something from him, he would have suspected the worst. But the bastard was just too devious and cunning, terrifyingly so. Mordred had played him like a fiddle. He had understood perfectly just how untrusting Sonny was, and went with the lightest of approaches. Knowing that any pressure would scare his paranoid mark off, Mordred had simply mentioned the ivory knife in passing and never spoke about it again. In fact, after the hook was in, he had never spoken to Sonny again, observing silently and waiting for his prey to come to him of its own volition. Sonny shuddered. Oh gods, how much has he seen? He was willing to bet that there had never even been a need for Mordred to wait days between their conversations. All of it was just a part of an intricate web of lies and manipulation. Fool. I am such a fool. How had he allowed himself to be fooled so completely? A crazy smile suddenly appeared on Sunny's face, and he let out a stifled laugh. Wasn't the answer obvious? Truth. His downfall was the truth. Like a masterful liar, Mordred had mixed just enough of it into his lies to make them believable. Oh, the irony. Cassie shifted slightly and asked, her voice soft and cautious, "Sunny, what exactly happened back there?" He let out a bitter chuckle and answered in a dark tone, "Why? Don't you know everything?" The blind girl didn't answer, and after some more time passed, he sighed. "Sorry, it was me. I got us into this mess." Sunny straightened and forced himself to calm down. Dwelling on the past was not going to do them any good. The situation was bad but not hopeless. The future was uncertain, and there would surely be a chance to turn everything around. He just needed to remain in control of himself and be ready to act when an opportunity presented itself. Who said that Mordred was going to have the last laugh? Do you remember the mysterious lost I told you about? The one who had taught me about the seed and the knives? Cassie nodded slowly. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then shook his head. Well, as it turns out, he lured me into the night temple on purpose. He needed the piece of mirror I found a while back, for some reason. When Master Pierce saw it, all hell broke loose. She remained silent for some time, and then asked, "Do you think that this lost is here in the night temple?" Sunny looked away. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded grim. "I do, actually. I think that this whole citadel is a prison. A prison that was meant to contain a single creature. Him." Cassie shivered and hugged her shoulders. A heavy silence settled between them. After a while, she said, "Maybe you're right. But Sunny," her voice trembled, "what kind of a being would require 100 awakened fighters, 2 ascended knights, and a saint to guard it?" Sunny stared at her, not knowing what to say. He had no idea. Chapter 567, No Escape. Sunny felt that there was a hint about what manner of a creature Mordred was in the fact that only the lost and human echoes had been allowed to guard him, but that was too little information to make a guess. What else did he know about the man who called himself the Prince of Nothing? He was reasonably sure that Mordred was a human, or at least had been once at some point. A nightmare creature could fake a human voice, but not the knowledge of the waking world that Mordred had shown. Sunny also felt that the mysterious prince had told the truth about conquering the first nightmare at 12 years of age. Other than that, all Sunny had was the description of the cruel sight, which told of a prince that had been given away to a monstrous dream spawn, and later returned only to find out that he wasn't welcome in his father's home anymore. That, and the fact that the mirror beast had been created by Mordred, much like Saint had been created by him. That was not much to go off of. With a sigh, Sunny looked around the cage. Due to the concave nature of its floor, he and Cassie were forced to stay close to each other. The only surface flat enough to sit comfortably was at the very center of the dome, and not too large in diameter. The cage was utterly empty, with the exception of a rusty bucket that was covered by a wooden lid. Sunny stared at a bucket for a while, then grimaced. "How long do you think they'll keep us here?" Cassie remained silent for a while, then answered evenly, "That depends on whether they can contain the prisoner." A deep scowl appeared on his face. Would 100 elite awakened warriors and 2 masters, all in service to a great clan, be able to handle Mordred? Before today, he would have said yes without a moment of hesitation. No matter how powerful the mysterious prince was, how could he contend against an entire army? But after seeing the terror on Sir Pierce's face and how nervous the lost were, Sunny wasn't so sure anymore. And what would happen if Mordred somehow prevailed? Would they be safe? Or would they learn that terror themselves? Crap! Sunny threw a dark glance at the door of the chamber and closed his eyes. For now, there was nothing they could do but wait. Minutes passed, slowly converging into hours. With no windows, it was hard to measure the passage of time. Sunny and Cassie mostly remained silent, partially because each was preoccupied with their own thoughts, and partially because there was nothing useful they could say. The night temple shuddered several more times, but these tremors weren't as strong as the first 2. Sunny silently meditated, feeling the shadow essence dissipate from his muscles and his strength slowly diminishing. After a while, he stood up, climbed to the walls of the cage, and studied the runes, then explored every centimeter of the cell. He even tried to bend and dislodge the iron bars, but it was useless. The cage seemed to be built to imprison masters or, perhaps, even saints. Even at his full power, Sonny wouldn't have been able to break free with brute force. After a while, he had no choice but to slide back to the center of the dome and resume doing nothing. He hadn't had an opportunity like that in a long while. Actually, doing nothing was sort of relaxing, if he ignored the fact that their lives were hanging by a thread, of course. The blue glow of the runes and the orange light of the oil lamp were soft and dim, leaving the chamber dark and full of shadows. Somewhere outside, a gruesome massacre was perhaps taking place. But here, everything was calm and silent. Sonny was on the verge of dozing off when Cassie suddenly turned to face the door. "Someone is coming." He opened his eyes and stood up, then glanced at the oil lamp with a dark expression. Its dancing flame trembled and then disappeared for a moment when the door opened with a bang and a gust of wind entered the cell. 5 people came inside. 4 of them were lost warriors, their faces grim and their armor bloodied. One was the same sentinel who had locked them inside, his face ashen and pale, a piece of white cloth wrapped around his head like a makeshift bandage. The 5th was a woman with beautiful red hair, wearing a black tunic, Master Wealthy. There was a strange amulet in the shape of an anvil hanging on a thin chain around her neck, and murder in her eyes. The aura she emanated was truly frightening. So, Mordred did not manage to escape after all. The master threw a cold glance at Cassie, then turned to Sonny. You brought that piece of mirror into the citadel, correct?" Sonny shifted slightly. "I did." The corner of Wealthy's mouth twitched. "Who instructed you to do so?" He blinked a couple of times. "What?" "No one instructed me. I had no idea what that shard was. I just thought that it was curious and picked it up." The beautiful woman glanced at one of the lost, who nodded. "He is telling the truth, or at least believes in what he says." Sonny studied the lost, who was a man in his 30s, with a gaunt face and clear gray eyes. Great. Another walking lie detector. Wealthy frowned, then pierced Sonny with a heavy gaze. "What was your purpose in coming to Night Temple?" Sonny hesitated for a few moments. When he spoke, his voice sounded frightened and a little shaky. "I've been told that there is a special knife here on the altar. I am interested in that knife because it has to do with the past of the Chained Isles. I am a researcher at the Awakened Academy. You see, maybe you've read my previous exploration report. It's, quite famous." The master stared at him for some time, then glanced at the lost with clear eyes and shook her head dejectedly. "All this because of one clueless fool." Yes, I am a pathetic, useless fool. Believe it." Sonny cleared his throat. "Master Wealthy, I am very sorry for the trouble I've caused, but, what is going on? And when are you going to release us?" She suddenly let out a stifled laugh, then looked at him with a dark, furious expression. "Release you? If you knew what your actions have caused, you would have begged me to keep you in this cell. At least that fiend can't get to you here, no. The 2 of you will remain locked up until we deal with the mess you've made, and we will deal with it, believe me." That was not exactly the answer Sonny wanted to hear, but at least it gave him some information. Mordred wasn't contained yet. Rather, he and the Valor forces seemed to be in some sort of a stalemate. Master Wealthy gritted her teeth, then turned away. However, before leaving, she stopped for a moment and then said, her voice grim, "Now that the temple is sealed, no one but Lord Cormac can unseal it anyway. With the gateway destroyed, there's no escape. Where would you even go?" With that, she clenched her fists and left the chamber. The 4 lost followed, closing the door behind them. Sonny stared at it for a while, a bleak expression on his face. No one but Lord Cormac can unseal it. Crap. The saint was not supposed to return until a month from now. He looked at Cassie, then at their cage, and lastly at the glowing runes. This was going to be a long and terrible month. Chapter 568, Full Circle. He sat back down, waited for a while, and then turned to Cassie. Did you take a look at her attributes? She sat down too and sighed. Yes, her the four lost with her. Sir Pierce too. I also saw the name and rank of their aspects. Sonny frowned. What? Since when can you read aspects too? The blind girl shrugged. Since my awakening. He stared at her for a bit. What a useful ability. In worse news, if she had not known some of his secrets before, she surely knew them now. How infuriating. Sonny grimaced, lingered for a bit, and then said, Good. Chances are we'll need that information before all of this is over. He didn't press her for answers yet, since there was a lot he had to think about. Some more time passed with both of them remaining silent. After a while, the door of the chamber opened once more, and the familiar four lost entered. The one with a bandaged head was carrying a tray of food and a water skin. He studied them for a few moments, a cold expression on his handsome face, and then threw the food and the water skin through the iron bars without approaching the cage. Sonny suppressed his anger and opened his mouth, assuming the persona of a cowardly researcher. Hey, Sir Awakened. Can you tell us what is going on, please? We don't even know what is wrong. The sentinel glanced at him darkly and spat in a commanding tone. Silence. His voice was clear and strong, full of arrogant confidence and deep animosity toward the two of them. Without saying another word, the lost left, once again locking the door behind them. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly lowered his gaze and glanced at the food that rolled down the slope of the dome to his feet. Then, suddenly, he threw his head back and laughed loudly. Oh gods. Never thought I'll be eating this crap again. Right in front of him, reflecting the blue glow of the runes, two colorless tubes of synth paste were lying on the floor. He knew their shape all too well. They had a late supper, which consisted of a synthetic paste that had the consistency of mud and tasted about the same. Still, this vile invention was cheap to produce and supposed to contain all the nutrients one needed to barely survive. Sonny had not missed the damned sludge at all. In the outskirts, the easiest food to get was called a universal ration pack, or simply a rat pack. It contained a tube of synth paste, a cheap water filter, and several dry, tasteless crackers. This was what he mostly ate before becoming an awakened, so now Sonny felt as though his life had come full circle. Such irony, after a while, tired and weak without the essence sustaining their bodies. They decided to sleep. The flat space in the center of the cage was so small that Sonny and Cassie had to settle with their backs against each other. With nothing but 2 layers of thin fabric separating their skin, Sonny could feel the heartbeat reverberating through her lithe body. The cage was cold and chilly, but at least his back was warm. They lay in silence for a while, trying to fall asleep. Before they did, however, Cassie suddenly spoke. Sonny. Her voice was quiet and hesitant. How is she doing? Do you know? He kept his eyes closed and remained silent for a few moments, then said with no particular emotion, She is doing great. She is a devil already. Now stop bothering me. Cassie sighed and didn't say anything else. In the middle of the night, if it was night outside, he suddenly woke up, disturbed by a sudden change in her breathing. Through the thin fabric of their clothes, he could feel the blind girl's body tense up, her breathing rugged and uneven. Sonny hesitated, then turned around and looked at Cassie. In the pale glow of the runes, her delicate face seemed white and bloodless. It was contorted in a tortured grimace, with beads of sweat appearing on her forehead. Her eyes were moving hectically behind the eyelids. He lingered, not knowing what to do. It was obvious that Cassie was having a vision, and that, like most of her visions, this one was painful and terrifying. Was he supposed to wake her up? Or would it do more harm than good? Before he could decide, she suddenly sat up with a stifled yelp. Her chest was rising and falling wildly, and there was a panicked expression on her face. The blind girl raised her hands and tried to feel her surroundings, clearly not quite remembering where she was. Sonny caught one of them, making Cassie flinch, and said darkly, Take a hold of yourself, damn it. You're in a cage in Night Temple. Stop thrashing around. She froze, surrendering to his iron grip. After a while, Cassie took a deep breath and said weakly, "I'm all right." He let her go, picked up the mostly empty water skin, and put it onto her hand. The blind girl drank the last of their water and closed her eyes, her breathing slowly returning to normal. Sunny waited for a minute and then asked in a gloomy tone, "Another vision?" She silently nodded. A dark grin appeared on his face. "What? Did we die again?" Cassie shook her head, then opened her eyes and frowned. No, this time I saw someone else." She put the water skin on the floor, hugged her knees, and spoke again, her voice still tense, but now much calmer. "It was one of the lost, the man with gray eyes who advised Lady Wealthy. He was in front of a large crucible, throwing shards of broken mirrors into the fire. There were thousands of them, all reflecting his image. Only at some point one of the reflections stopped. She shivered. The lost stopped too, and stared at the motionless reflection, his eyes full of utter terror. It was as though he was paralyzed by fear. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out of his mouth. After that, he didn't move anymore, but the reflection finally did. It raised its head and smiled. Cassie grew silent and then added, her voice trembling, "That smile filled me with so much dread that all I could think about was to run away. But I couldn't. That was when I woke up." Sunny looked at her for a while, thinking. His face was cold and grim. It wasn't hard to understand what the vision was about. Mordred's aspect was somehow tied to mirrors, after all. But what did it all mean? What were his powers exactly? He sighed and turned away. "It's fine. You did well. Go back to sleep if you can." She listened to him and slowly lay down. However, Sunny could tell by her breathing that the blind girl was wide awake. He couldn't sleep, too. In the morning, the door of their cell opened, and the same group of lost brought them more food. Only this time, there were only 3 of them. The man with gray eyes was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 569, on the 7th day. The 3 lost seemed to be in a better shape than they had been the day before. Their armor was cleaned, and their wounds were properly tended to. However, somehow, they looked worse to wear. Their faces were paler, their movements were full of tension, and there was a strange darkness hiding in their eyes. Only the sentinel who had spoken to Sunny before was the same. If anything, his cold resolve seemed to have grown stronger, as did his silent hostility. Without saying a word, he threw the tubes of scent paste into the cage, then pointed at the waterskin laying on the floor near Cassie. Sunny tossed the empty waterskin out and received a new one in return. "Sir, can you please tell us what is going on? Where is your, 4th friend? Did something happen?" The sentinel stared at him with a heavy, grim expression. When he answered, his voice was steady and even. "Don't speak unless spoken to." With that, the lost left. The door of the cell locked with a loud click, the flame of the oil lamp trembled, and everything became silent once again. Sunny sighed. What an unfriendly fellow. Just like that, their imprisonment started. There were no windows in the stone chamber, so it was almost impossible to track the passage of time. Their only hint was the appearance of the 3 lost, who brought them food and water once every day, and sometimes changed the oil in the lantern. Sunny and Cassie spent the first few days in silence and tense, grim anticipation. They slept back to back, sharing the heat of their bodies to overcome the chilling cold of the prison cell, and suffered through the daytime without speaking to each other unless absolutely necessary. Both were waiting for something disastrous to happen. However, nothing did. The night temple had not shaken again, and nothing came through the heavy door to either set them free or destroy them. Neither Master Wealthy nor Master Pierce had visited the enchanted chamber, as well as if Sunny and Cassie were completely forgotten. The stone cell was silent and unchanging. However, they could still tell that something sinister and dire was going on outside. The evidence was in how the 3 lost that brought them food, their only connection to the rest of the world, looked and behaved. With each day, 2 of them seemed more and more frightened, while the 3rd grew increasingly cold and grim. No matter how much Sunny tried to get the sentinel to speak, the arrogant warrior refused to tell him anything, and only glared at the prisoners through the iron bars of the cage. his eyes full of ire. Their actions changed too. If before all three used to look at Sunny and Cassie while delivering the food, now only the sentinel did. The other two stood facing the door, their weapons drawn. Sometimes their hands were trembling. Realizing that nothing was going to change anytime soon, Sunny had to reluctantly change his behavior. He shared everything he knew about Mordred with Cassie and learned everything she remembered about the Night Temple in return. With nothing else to do but teach each other, they went over every little detail many times over, only to end up with nothing. No new clues, no deeper understanding, not even a good guess or two. It was simply a dead end, for now. On the seventh day, the three lost arrived as usual. The sentinel walked forward and threw the tubes of synth paste into the cage, while the other two assumed defensive positions behind his back. Their eyes seemed dark and hollow. However, before Sunny could toss the empty water skin outside, a chilling scream suddenly resounded in the corridor outside the door. A long, drowning shriek echoed from the cold stones, full of torment and indescribable agony. How could a human throat produce such a sound? The lost tensed and gripped their weapons, one of them taking an involuntary step back. The sentinel snarled and pushed the man in the back. "Get a hold of yourself, cowards. Remember your duty." With that, he threw the water skin to Sunny and rushed outside, a slender sword appearing in his hand from a whirlpool of dancing sparks of light. The others gritted their teeth and followed, shutting the door behind them. The flame of the oil lamp trembled. On the next day, when the door opened again, only two lost walked through it. One of the surviving lost looked like a walking corpse. There were no wounds on his body, but his eyes were dull and glassy. He glanced at Sunny and Cassie lifelessly, then turned around and raised his weapon, staring at the open door with tired dread. Even the arrogant sentinel seemed a bit diminished. His handsome face was still cold and resolute, but there was a slight weakness to how his shoulders were set, and a slight uncertainty to his movements. He tossed the tubes of synth paste and the water inside the cage, not even waiting for Sunny to return the other two water skins. Sunny wanted to try to get the lost to speak to him again, as usual, but then thought better of it. There was a sharp edge in the man's eyes that made the idea of pushing him even a little seem too dangerous. The two lost left, leaving the prisoners alone again. Sunny stared at the door and the orange flame of the oil lamp dancing beside it for a few minutes, then shivered and turned away. Their jailers returned several more times. With each day they looked more disheveled and exhausted, the darkness in their eyes growing deeper and deeper. A few times Sunny could hear strange, disturbing sounds coming from the corridor, but the two lost did not seem to react to them at all. A week later, the food did not arrive for an especially long time. Sunny glared gloomily at the door, feeling pangs of hunger torment his empty stomach. One tube of synth paste a day was not nearly enough to satiate him, so he was always hungry, just like he had been in the past, living on the streets in the outskirts. Hours passed, but the two lost were nowhere to be seen. Where the hell are they? Then, something suddenly crashed into the door from the outside with a loud bang. A bit of dust fell from the ceiling, and then everything became silent once more. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then slowly looked down. Something was flowing from beneath the door, streaming down the slope of the dome toward the cage. In the dim orange glow of the oil lantern, the liquid seemed almost black. But he knew its smell too well. Blood. It was human blood. After that day, no one came to feed them anymore. Chapter 570 Thirst. Sunny looked at the stream of blood that was getting closer and closer to the cage, then glanced back at the door and waited, wondering if someone or something would burst through it and enter the cell. But nothing did. After that first loud bang, everything stayed eerily quiet. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, he slowly turned away from the door and looked at Cassie. "Do you smell it?" She lingered for a moment, then nodded. "Blood." Sunny remained motionless for a bit, then walked back to his usual place and sat down. His face was grim. After a while, he said in a dark tone, "We are going to need to start rationing water. Humans could survive for a long time without food, but water was much more precious. Without it, a healthy human could die in a matter of days. And there were very few more agonizing ways to go. Cassie turned her head, then asked somberly, "Why? Do you think that they are going to just leave us here?" Sonny opened his mouth to retort that she was the one who could see the future, but in the end, he held his tongue. Just in case. They had one full water skin left. As awakened, they would also be able to last longer without water than mundane humans. Especially Sonny, whose body was strengthened by 3 cores, blood weave, and his shadows. But would that be long enough? There was no way to know. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, then tried to meditate. Time crawled slowly. Their hunger grew, but no one came to bring them food. With their last connection to the outside world gone, it was impossible to tell what day it was. Sonny and Cassie remained in the barely illuminated darkness alone, waiting for something to happen, or slept while shivering from the cold. It wasn't long before their water ran out. The water skin wasn't that large, to begin with. Then came the thirst. Sonny thought that he knew what madness felt like. But after spending several days, at least he thought that a few had passed. Without drinking anything, he learned that there was a completely different realm of crazed delirium. The feeling of thirst was absolutely maddening, torturous, and suffocating. His throat hurt as if it was being cut. His lips had dried and cracked, and so did his tongue. His head was full of pulsating pain, and his muscles were experiencing excruciating cramps. All he could think about was water, water, water. The worst part of it all, however, was the fear. Fear that he was going to die in this cursed cage like a dog, forgotten and discarded. Maybe one day someone would open the heavy door and find his desiccated corpse reaching hopelessly and pathetically toward it through the iron bars. Sonny had tried everything he could think of to get out of the cage, but nothing he had done helped. The only result was that his condition worsened even further. By then, his throat and mouth felt as though they were on fire, and his entire body ached terribly. He felt weak and lethargic, and his vision was starting to blur. Sonny spent most of his time staring at the orange flame of the oil lamp, because it was more or less the only thing he could see clearly. Then, it disappeared too. The stone cell became even darker, with only the ghostly dim glow of the runes illuminating the iron bars of the cage. Sonny closed his eyes. Was it really hopeless? No, he couldn't give up. He refused to. In all this suffering and despair, the only thing that kept him somewhat sane was the fact that Cassie was right there with him, going through the same hell. At least he wasn't alone. Despite all the complicated emotions and the heavy burden of past sins, sharing his pain with someone had made it, if not bearable, then at least a little easier. Neither of them would have been able to endure the agony and the terror of not knowing whether they were going to live or die, the fear of the unknown, alone. But together, the two of them managed to persevere, somehow. Maybe just to not let the other see them break first. Sonny didn't know how many days had passed since the flame of the oil lantern died out. Time lost its meaning a while ago. All he knew was the thirst, the pain, and the stubborn, spiteful will to hold on just a little bit longer. At some point, he opened his eyes in the darkness and stared at the blurry blue glow of the sorceress runes. Then, he turned his head and looked at Cassie, who was sleeping in his arms. There was a sound coming from behind the door. Sonny wanted to tell Cassie to wake up, but his throat was so dry that no sound came out of it. All it did was bring him more pain. He gritted his teeth, then shook her gently, waited for her to open her eyes, and carefully placed a finger on her lips. He wanted her to remain quiet. The blind girl hesitated for a few moments, then nodded. They let go of each other and shakily rose to their feet. By that point, the faint sound became more clear. It was as though something sharp was scraping against stones as it was being dragged across them slowly. Scurrish, 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 scurrish. The haunting, grating sound was drawing closer and closer. Finally, it reached to just beyond the cell and stopped abruptly. Then, they heard another scrape, this one much smaller, and the click of the door's lock. It opened, and Sonny saw a blurry silhouette standing at the threshold of the stone chamber. Half blinded by the thirst, he couldn't tell who or what it was, but the smell of blood was back. Only now, it was much, much stronger. Chapter 57:1. Don't make a sound. Sonny stood motionlessly, gathering whatever strength he had left, which was far too little. Cassie was silent, too, a tense expression on her pale face. With his vision compromised and his shadow sense limited to the circle of runes glowing around the cage, all Sonny could see was a blurry silhouette. He was almost sure that it was a human, however. Something about the dark figure was wrong. Utterly, terribly wrong. A strong smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. The silhouette swayed and then took a step forward. The scraping sound resounded once again, coming from it. Sonny strained his eyes and thought that he had noticed a slender sword being dragged behind the person. A hint of recognition appeared in his clouded mind. But in the next moment, a sudden burst of creaky, gurgling laughter threw his thoughts into a spin. Sonny shivered. That voice. The silhouette took another step forward, coming to the point where the flat surface of the floor gave place to the downward slope of the dome. Coincidentally, that was the moment when the dim glow of the runes finally reached it. Sonny flinched. See, curses. A familiar face was looming in the darkness above him. Even through the haze clouding his sight, Sonny managed to recognize the arrogant sentinel who had locked them in this cage a long, long time ago. Only now, that cold and handsome man was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he looked broken and gaunt, his face contorted in a demented grin. But much worse than that. In the place where the sentinel's eyes used to be, two bloody pits were gaping, crimson streams flowing down his cheeks like tears. His fingers were marred with blood, too. As Sonny recoiled, the Lost laughed again, and then suddenly clawed at his face, his laughter turning into a stifled groan, and then into a whisper. Can't get me anymore. Can't get me. I tricked him. Then, the lunatic abruptly froze. Slowly, his head turned, and the bloody pits of his eyes stared directly at the cage. A moment later, a grimace of hatred appeared on his face. You, it is all your fault, yours. You let him free. Sonny felt weak and barely able to stand, and he was suffering too much to have any energy for fear. So, although it was obvious that the sentinel had returned to exact revenge and kill them, he didn't mind. Instead, he welcomed it. Good, come. Come here then. Just come here and open the door. You can try to kill me all you want. Just open the damned door, you wretch. As long as the door was open, they could escape. The Lost swayed again, then made a move to step forward, and stopped. His sword fell to the floor with a clang. Damn you. Instead, a whirlpool of sparks swirled around his hands, and a curved bow appeared in them. Sonny's heart grew cold. No. The sentinel whispered, Vermin. With that, he drew the string of the bow. As soon as he did, a ghostly arrow appeared on it, its tip long and sharp as a razor. Sonny held his breath and stared at the tip of the arrow, then slowly turned his head and looked at Cassie, who stood motionlessly beside him. His face grew solemn. Don't make a sound, please, don't make a sound. A moment later, he heard the sound of the string and saw the arrow streak above the blind girl's shoulder, the wind throwing a few strands of her hair into the air and shatter against the stones. Cassie flinched, but remained absolutely silent. The sentinel frowned. Alive? I know that you are still alive, but not for long now. He drew the bow again and sent another ghostly arrow flying. This time, it flew mere centimeters above Sonny's head. For the first time in his life, he felt actually thankful for his short stature. But the crazed Lost wasn't done. Sonny turned his head and stared directly at him. A ghastly smile suddenly appeared on the sentinel's face. Got you now. He drew the bow again and then lowered it, aiming directly at Sonny's heart. Sonny did not move a muscle. A moment before the Lost released the string, something small and swift suddenly dashed toward him from behind and bit his leg ferociously. It was the covetous coffer. Back when everything started, Sonny had left it in the interrogation room on purpose. He couldn't control a memory like he would an echo, but the coffer was still able to follow simple commands. The command it had received from Sonny in those moments was to hide, and then find him. And then wait. The poor thing had loitered near the locked door of the cell for several weeks, hiding every time anyone approached. And now, it was finally able to receive a new command: attack. The box scurried from its hiding place, reached the cell, and ran through the door on its 8 short iron legs, just in time to sink its sharp triangular teeth into the sentinel's heel. They easily pierced the steel of his armored boot. Blood spurted into the air, and with a surprised shriek, the man stumbled forward, fell, and rolled down the slope of the dome, crashing into the bars of the cage. The arrow flashed past Sonny, missing him by a hair's breadth. But he did not care, already moving. As soon as the damage was done, Sonny dismissed the covetous coffer, and before the runes could devour the tiny amount of shadow essence returned to him by that act, sent all of it into his hurting muscles. And now, he was dashing up the slope toward where the Lost was trying to get back to his feet. Before he could, however, Sonny was already upon him. He thrust his hands through the bars, wrapped one arm around the man's neck, pressed him against the cage, and used the other hand to lock him into a stranglehold. Sonny was weakened by the runes, the hunger, and the thirst, but he still had 3 cores and 3 shadows wrapped around his body. His strength was fueled by fury, desperation, and cold, murderous will. All of it was barely enough to hold the struggling sentinel in place. The 2 men struggled furiously, one trying to break free, the other trying to squeeze the very life out of his enemy. Sonny used everything he had, and then a bit more, strangling the Lost with all the strength he had left in his gaunt, starved body. He knew that there was not going to be another chance. He had to kill this man in order to survive. And even more important than that, he simply wanted to. So, he bit his lip, feeling drops of blood flowing into his dry mouth, and pulled. After what felt like an eternity, when his vision had gone almost entirely black and his muscles were on the verge of collapsing, he felt something snap under his grip, and then the body of his enemy suddenly grew limp. The sentinel was dead, probably. Sonny let out a shaky breath, let go of the man's corpse, and fell back, sliding down to the center of the dome. He couldn't stand up anymore. In truth, he couldn't even open his eyes. Not that he would be able to see anything. The fight had taken the last of his strength. His chest rose and fell, every breath sending a wave of agony through his body. He didn't think that he could move. "I'm done." Through the haze, Sonny heard someone walk unsteadily past him, and some time later, a loud click. Then, 2 small, weak hands grabbed him by the shoulders, and Sonny felt himself being dragged across the cold stones. He didn't quite understand what was happening. However, soon, his whole body shuddered, and a dark grin slowly appeared on his face. A raging, revitalizing flood of shadow essence was flowing into his 3 cores. He was free. Chapter 572, Sweeter Than Heaven. Sonny remained motionless for a while, then took a look into his soul sea. It didn't seem lifeless and drained anymore. The 3 black suns of his cores loomed above in a perfect triangle, burning with furious dark flames, and the tranquil sea was in turmoil, replete with raging energy. He glanced at the shadow of the sentinel that had joined the silent ranks of his brethren, made a grimace, and closed his eyes. His body was still weak, and on the verge of shutting down, but now, satiated with essence, it was not completely useless anymore. He concentrated, then summoned the soul serpent and circulated the essence through its coils. Feeling strength return to his aching muscles, his lethargy receded a little. Finally, Sonny opened his eyes and turned his head to look at Cassie. The blind girl was laying on the floor beside him, just outside the circle of runes, completely spent. She must have retrieved the keys from the sentinel's corpse, unlocked the door, then dragged him out of the cage. Sonny didn't know how she had managed to carry him all the way in her terrible condition, but she had. Now, Cassie was barely breathing. However, the color was slowly returning to her face. She was regenerating her soul essence, too. Just the effort of turning his head made Sonny feel dizzy. He rested for a few moments, breathing heavily, then summoned Saint. The taciturn knight appeared out of his shadow, her ruby eyes burning in the darkness. He stared at her from below for a second, then gave a silent command. "Close the door. Guard us." The demon silently turned and walked away, her steps echoing in the silence of the stone cell. Sonny rested some more, then gritted his teeth and tried to sit up. He succeeded on the third try. Water, water. He needed water. All of his being lusted for a single drop of the precious liquid. A swirl of sparks danced around his hand, and then the most glorious thing he had ever seen appeared in it. It was a dazzling, beautiful, sublime bottle made out of patterned blue glass. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then crawled closer to Cassie, held up her head, and brought the endless spring to her cracked lips. As soon as the first drops of water fell into her mouth, the blind girl opened her eyes, flinched, and then drank greedily. At some point, she raised one hand and grabbed his own, as if afraid that he would take the bottle away. Sonny observed her, his own throat spasming in pain. Finally, he wrestled his hand free and drank his own share. The cold water was, without a shadow of a doubt, the sweetest and most magnificent thing he had ever tasted. Drinking it was more euphoric than being reborn during the awakening, and much more rewarding by far. With each sip, he could feel life returning into his tortured body, as if he was rising from the dead. In these moments, he was probably the happiest he had ever been. After both of them satiated their thirst, they fell to the floor, dead tired. Sonny and Cassie were revitalized by the water, but mentally exhausted and utterly drained. It wasn't long before they fell asleep. When Sonny woke up, he felt much better. He was still in a rather bad shape and weak from hunger, his stomach pulsing with pain, but at least not dying anymore. He sat up, drank more water, and looked around the cell. Cassie was still sound asleep, laying on the cold stone floor. She looked to be in a worse condition than him, but there was color to her face, and her breathing was calm and steady. Even though the blind girl did not possess the miraculous blood weave, she was still a powerful awakened. Her body was much more resilient and quicker to heal than that of a mundane human. Sonny suspected that in a couple of days, both of them would be mostly back to normal, provided that nothing else happens. What were the chances of that? He glanced at Saint, who was guarding the heavy door, then at the cage and the corpse of the sentinel laying near it. His face became contorted by a grimace of disgust. Sonny sighed, then closed his eyes and sent one of his shadows to take a look outside the door. The long corridor was empty and submerged in darkness. Nothing moved there, and nothing seemed to pose any threat. The only thing he saw was another corpse, this one belonging to the partner of the dead sentinel, sprawled near the cell, terribly mangled and in the early stages of decomposition. Sonny stared at it for a while, then commanded the shadow to return. The silence outside was almost eerie. At that moment, Cassie stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up and groaned quietly, then slowly turned her head in his direction. Her second aspect ability must have returned, or maybe she just located him by the smell after weeks spent in the iron cage. Both of them reeked terribly enough to scare away a pack of hungry wolves. Sonny handed her the endless spring, stared at the bottle in the delicate hand of the blind girl for a few moments, then turned away. Cassie drank the water, coughed, then returned the memory and asked, her voice raspy, "What are we going to do now?" Sonny hesitated for a bit, then shrugged. "First, we need to find some food. Once we are full and strong enough to fight, we'll see. Gather information, assess the situation, then act." She nodded, then slowly rose to her feet. The quiet dancer appeared in her hand in the glow of white sparks. Sonny stood up too and headed toward the door. Saint moved aside, allowing him to open it. Standing at the threshold, he hesitated for a few seconds, and then took a step forward. A dark expression appeared on his face. Sonny knew that he had to be careful, but he also felt entitled to some vengeance of his own. Chapter 573 Hunger. Stepping over the corpse laying at the doorstep of their cell, Sonny and Cassie entered the dark, empty corridor and stopped for a few short moments. They listened tensely to the echoing silence that reigned over it, and then cautiously moved forward. Most humans would have felt lost in the impenetrable darkness, but neither of them found it uncomfortable. Stepping softly, they walked toward the entrance to the closest stairwell, the shadows gliding ahead of them to scout for potential dangers. Sonny didn't let the shadows go too far, though. knowing that he might need their help at a moment's notice. In the past weeks, he had learned everything that Cassie knew about the Night Temple, so there was a clear mental picture of its interior in his head, the parts of the great cathedral that the blind girl was familiar with, at least. Currently, they were at the lowest levels of one of its 7 belfries, deep below the outward ring of the main structure. There were 2 other belfries in the outward ring, and both the ring itself and the 3 towers descending from it remained uninhabited. They were mostly empty or occupied by storage rooms, workshops, and other facilities the Lost used to maintain the citadel. Still, there was no way of knowing what might have changed inside the temple since their imprisonment, and what danger lay ahead in the darkness. They moved from one level to another, not meeting a single living soul. Here and there, signs of battle could be seen. The furniture was smashed to pieces, the walls scraped by sharp blades or cracked, a few of them completely shattered. The floor was stained with blood, but there were no more corpses around. All they found were a clump of torn, bloodied clothes and several overturned tables, as though someone had desperately tried to build a barricade. Whoever it had been, it didn't seem as though they succeeded. The makeshift barricade was broken, and there was a lot of blood on the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling behind it. Sunny and Cassie walked past, their expressions turning somber. After a while, Sunny finally discovered a storage room full of wooden crates behind one of the locked doors, each containing hundreds of tubes of synth paste. His mouth instantly watered. Food. No matter how much he hated the muddy sludge, right now, he was ready to kill for a single mouthful. Sunny and Cassie opened the storage room with one of the keys attached to the keyring they had picked up from the body of the sentinel, entered it, and then locked the door behind them. Both of them were starving, but before Cassie had a chance to grab a tube, Sunny stopped her. "Don't eat more than one, and eat it slowly." She hesitated, then turned to him with a frown. "Why, I'm so hungry." He shook his head and sat down on one of the crates. "If you eat too much, too quickly after going without food for a long time, you might die." The blind girl tilted her head. "What? Why? How do you know?" Sunny opened a tube and shrugged. "Seen it happen." That was just general knowledge among the street kids in the outskirts. However, Cassie had probably never faced real hunger. Even in the dark city, the inhabitants of the outer settlement had been fed generously by Changing Star and her hunting party during her time there. Sunny was surprised, actually, that normal children didn't learn about such stuff in school. The blind girl lingered for a few moments, but listened to his advice in the end. Each of them slowly ate one tube of synth paste and then rested for a while. After that, Sunny summoned the covetous coffer, patted it on the lid, and loaded a couple of crates into the small box. "What a good little box you are. Good job, coffer." Then, feeling refreshed and energized, the strength slowly returning to their starved bodies, they moved the crates around and took turns washing themselves with the help of the endless spring. Sunny went first. Taking off the reeking clothes and scrubbing his skin with cold water felt heavenly. When he was done, he summoned the undying chain and finally felt like himself again. After that, he sat by the door quietly and, using one of the shadows, kept watch on the corridor outside. In the dead silence on the stone belfry, Sunny couldn't help but hear every sound around him. The rustle of the crude tunic against Cassie's skin as she took it off and dropped it on the ground, the murmur of the water as it flowed down her petite, supple body, and the small sighs of relief she made as the weight of several weeks of imprisonment was washed away by it. After a while, she joined him, clad once again in her blue coat and polished armor. Sunny hesitated for a bit, then said, "Come closer." Cassie tilted her head a little, then did as he told. Sunny reached toward one of the extinguished oil lamps, and then proceeded to rub her cuirass, pauldron, and other steel elements of the armor with soot. The blind girl frowned but didn't stop him. "Are you trying to make it non-reflective?" He nodded. "Yeah, just in case." They still didn't know what powers Mordret possessed, but whatever they were, mirrors and reflections obviously had something to do with it. The undying chain was forged out of bleak steel, but Cassie's armor was too lustrous for him to feel at ease. That was also the reason why he had not summoned the cruel sight yet. The silver blade of the enchanted spear was like a clear mirror, and he wasn't sure what might happen if he did. After Sunny was done covering up the polished steel of Cassie's armor with soot, they rested for a while, ate a little more, and left the storage room behind. It was time to ascend the belfry and return to the outward ring of the Night Temple. As soon as they stepped out of the stairwell and found themselves between the black walls of the main structure of the Night Temple again, a terrible smell assaulted their nostrils. Sunny grimaced and then covered his nose with a hand. This was the familiar vile smell of death. Just like the belfry, the outward ring was submerged in darkness. No one had bothered to change the oil in the lamps, and there were no windows to let in the light. The corridors here were wider and their adornments richer. However, just like before, everything was silent and there was nobody around. Sunny shivered. Just where is everyone? The Night Temple seemed completely deserted. At first, when they had been hungry and weak, he was glad for it. But now the absence of people was starting to make him nervous. What the hell had happened here while they were locked up? Moving slowly, the two of them cautiously headed in the direction of the gates leading to the outside. It wasn't long before Sunny noticed a trail of dried blood on the stones beneath his feet, as though someone dead or dying had been dragged across them. Coincidentally, the trail led in the same direction. Soon the smell of death grew stronger, making it hard to breathe. Sunny and Cassie entered the hall separating them from the gates, and froze. His face darkened. That is not good. Chapter 574, Black Altar. Before the gates of the temple, a large hall stood, submerged in darkness. The air was permeated with the smell of rot, and at least a dozen eviscerated bodies lay on the cold stones, staring into nothingness with their empty eyes. Sunny had long become accustomed to such sights, so he wasn't too bothered by it. The implication, however, left him feeling cold. Damnation. He entered the hall, both Saint and the serpent emerging silently from his shadows. Cassie followed, gripping the hilt of the quiet dancer so hard that her fingers turned white. Sunny walked over to the nearest corpse, held his breath, and knelt beside it, studying its wounds. Then, with a grim expression, he moved over to the next one and did the same. It took him some time to check on each of the slain lost, and by the end his eyes were full of darkness. The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then asked, her voice tense and trembling, "How did they die?" He lingered for a second, then shook his head. Sword wounds. Each of the fallen sentinels was killed with one precise fatal strike. However, most of them were terribly mutilated and covered in multiple wounds, none of them lethal, but all aimed at inflicting the maximum amount of pain. The killer, whoever it was, wanted his victims to suffer before they died. Well, Sunny was pretty sure that he knew who the killer was. Mordred, the man, or thing, that he had set free. It seemed that the Prince of Nothing had a sadistic streak about him. But that wasn't the problem. From everything that Sunny had learned before, he assumed that Mordred possessed a bizarre and powerful aspect that allowed him to deal either mind or soul damage to other living beings. That made him extremely dangerous. The prerequisite for this ability seemed to be looking the prisoner of the Night Temple in the eyes, which was good, since both Sunny and Cassie could naturally counter it. Sunny by fighting with his eyes closed, Cassie by simply being blind. However, these lost had clearly died in a ferocious and bloody melee. That meant that, on top of everything else, Mordred was a fighter of incredible skill. Skilled and powerful enough to not only kill a dozen experienced awakened with a sword, but also to play with his victims before he did. Just how was Sunny supposed to win against someone like that? He sighed, then walked past the corpses and approached the gate. Master Wealthy had told them that the citadel was sealed, and no one except for Saint Cormac would be able to open it. However, Sunny had to check for himself. He wrapped all three shadows around his body and tried to push open the gates, but to no avail. The heavy doors didn't budge even when Saint joined him. None of the keys their jailers had carried were of any use, too. There wasn't even a keyhole to insert them. Sunny looked beneath the surface of the gates, hoping to see the same type of primitive weave he had seen in the door of the Ebony Tower. But there was none. Curse it. He gave the gates a good kick, then turned around and walked back to Cassie in frustration. I guess we aren't getting out of here until the Saint arrives, which would happen in a week at the earliest. Would they even be able to survive that long? The blind girl frowned, then asked with uncertainty, "Where to, then?" Sunny thought for a few seconds. Since they were already stuck in this damned place, why not try and accomplish the task they had come here to complete in the first place? Let's go check on the gateway. Perhaps the ivory knife was still there somewhere. Leaving the scene of the cruel massacre behind, the two of them headed deeper into the stone bowels of the Night Temple. It took them a long time to cross the outward ring and enter the central temple. The distance itself was not that considerable, but the bizarre interior of the cathedral was disorienting and sprawling, resembling a vast, convoluted maze of black stone. They also had to remain cautious and move slowly so as to not walk into an ambush. The darkness, silence, and eerie emptiness of the deserted citadel were slowly stretching their already tense nerves. Both Sunny and Cassie had not recovered from their ordeal completely, so they had to stop and rest a couple of times, drinking water and eating small amounts of synth paste. They also encountered more morbid remnants of the struggle that had been going on inside the Night Temple while they were slowly dying inside the cage, rotting corpses of the lost, signs of bloodshed and destruction, as well as things that were too strange and vile to be explained by any kind of sane logic. It was as though they were traveling through the workshop of a mad butcher. With each minute that passed, Sunny grew more and more grim. For the first time since this whole disaster started, he actually began to question the moral implications of what his actions had led to. Even if he had been an unwilling accomplice, Mordred only managed to escape because of him. Had Sunny accidentally released an unspeakable evil upon the world? He wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, he didn't really care about the world, but on the other hand, Sunny didn't like to leave behind a mess without cleaning it up. It was just basic decency. A bit conflicted, he sent the shadow ahead, made sure that everything was fine, and finally led Cassie into the grand hall of the Night Temple. This place was both magnificent and uncanny. It was vast and full of darkness, reminding him of his home in the Dark City. The only difference was that this tenebrose cathedral was built upside down. Far above them, the ceiling was flat and stretched into the distance. The floor, on the contrary, arched downward like a giant bowl, with load-bearing stone seams protruding from it like bridges and roads. The hall was silent and somber, and absolutely empty. In its center, there was a wide stone platform. It was covered in rubble, large pieces of black obsidian laying in piles where the black altar had once stood. They really destroyed it. Sunny stared at the shattered altar, still not quite believing that the gateway was really obliterated. What madness was this? They lingered for a few moments, and then descended toward the platform. There, Sunny spent some time sifting through the rubble, hoping to find the ivory knife. But it was nowhere to be found. All he found was broken obsidian and pieces of Storm God's shattered statue. Either the knife had never been there to begin with, or Mordred had gotten to it first. Curse it! Sunny turned the head of the statue, looked beneath it, and then stood up, staring into the empty eyes of the dead goddess with dark fury. Damned liar, a prince of lies, that's who he is. As he was boiling with rage, Cassie suddenly took a step forward and touched him on the shoulder. Then, she pointed toward the other end of the grand hall and whispered, "I hear footsteps. Someone is coming." Sunny stared into the darkness, his hand itching to summon a weapon. His eyes gleamed dangerously. Let them come. Chapter 575 Confrontation. Sunny was tired of the silence, the emptiness, and the quiet dread. The fear of the unknown had been pressing heavily onto his heart, and for a short moment he wanted for this burdensome uncertainty to end, no matter how violent and dangerous the resulting confrontation would be. But then he had to grit his teeth and remind himself that giving in to anger and frustration was a sure way to die. Without knowing the scale of the threat, he had to remain calm and keep a cool head. His hand, already outstretched to summon a weapon, hovered in the air for a couple of moments, and then relaxed. Sunny sent one of his shadows forward, and soon saw human figures emerging from one of the passages, some of them limping, the others carrying stretchers with those of their brethren who were too heavily wounded to walk. The lost, they were the remaining guardians of the Night Temple. In front of them, a woman in a black tunic was walking. her red hair dirty and damp with sweat. There was a grim, dark expression on her face. So there are survivors, after all. There were a dozen or so warriors who could still fight, although they didn't seem to be in the best shape. Several were carrying lanterns and torches, the orange flames pushing the darkness reigning in the great hall back. They were still too far away to notice Sonny and Cassie, but he had no doubt that they would be discovered soon. What to do? What to do? Wait or hide? A moment later, the decision was made for him. As Sonny watched, one of the lost suddenly approached Master Wealthy and whispered something to her, then pointed directly at the shadow that was observing them from the darkness. Scrape. Sonny was more or less certain in his ability to contend with one of the ascended knights, provided of course that Saint and the Serpent were on his side. With the dozen lost supporting the opponent, though it was a fight he would have preferred to avoid, especially considering that what he needed the most right now was information, which the survivors possessed. Soon, a lone figure separated from the group of battered sentinels and headed their way with measured, steady steps. As soon as Sonny saw who it was, his face darkened. Master Pierce. The man was as rugged and severe as he had been when they first met, his steely eyes cold and hard. The stubble on his cheeks had turned into a short beard and his lusterless scale mail was damaged in several places, but other than that, he looked exactly the same. It was as though the weeks of bloody horror had no effect on him at all. Now the odds were really not in Sonny's favor. He was still sure of his ability to at least escape, though, if need be. Master Pierce approached the central platform and stopped, studying Sonny and Cassie with a heavy gaze. Sonny cleared his throat and faked a shaky smile. Sir Pierce, thank the gods we weren't sure that anyone was left alive. To his left, Cassie suddenly tensed. Knowing that she must have sensed something happening in the next few seconds, Sonny prepared for the worst. However, noting that the blind girl remained motionless, he didn't do anything rash, as well. Master Pierce spoke, his voice dark and heavy. Well, well, what do we have here? In the next moment, a vast whirlwind of white sparks surrounded the platform. Sonny cursed inwardly and watched as 10 human figures appeared from the sparks, surrounding them. In an instant, the number of their potential enemies almost doubled. These humans, though he had to suppress a shiver, their empty eyes, their empty shadows, no, they weren't humans at all. Instead, 10 echoes were staring at him with lifeless expressions, each radiating an eerie, deeply disturbing, and threatening aura. Pierce stared at them coldly. I see that the two of you are still alive. Sonny looked around, feverishly thinking about how to turn the situation around. Oh, about that. Before he could say anything, he noticed that Cassie turned her head slightly and glanced somewhere behind him, a small frown appearing on her face. Just like that, he knew that someone was there. Which was strange, considering that Sonny was always aware of what was behind his back thanks to the shadows, and couldn't see or sense anything right now. The blind girl was proven right, though. In the next moment, when something cold touched his neck, and a vaguely familiar raspy voice spoke into his ear. Don't move. Sonny froze. That voice, the female sentinel that was guarding the gates on the day we arrived. Why can't I see her or sense her shadow? The answer was rather obvious. The woman must have been able to don some form of invisibility thanks to her aspect. That was one nasty ability. He pretended to tremble. Yes, I am not moving. For a couple of moments, no one spoke. Then, Cassie turned her face toward the fearsome master and said, Sir Pierce, I would appreciate it if you could give us shelter and explain what is happening. We barely escaped the cage you put us in alive, and being met with such hostility is not how we imagined finding fellow humans again. He stared at her for a bit, then grinned. Give you shelter? That is a good joke. Give me one reason to not kill you both instead. Cassie frowned, but did not show any fear. Instead, she remained silent for a few seconds, and then said in a calm and even voice, You can try. You will certainly succeed, but not without paying a cost. Awakened sunless, and I might not be ascended, but we did not receive our designations for nothing. How many of your men and echoes will we take to hell with us? She paused for a moment, and then added, How many can you spare? Master Pierce opened his mouth, wishing to say something, but was cut off by Wealthy, who had approached from behind. The second Ascended spoke in a tired voice. Enough. We can't spare anyone, or anything. I know this and you do too, Pierce. These two are strong, they will be of use. We will take them with us. He grimaced, then spat. What if that thing is hiding in one of them? Lady Wealth glanced at Sunny and Cassie and shook her head. They have been locked in the lesser cell for weeks between all of us. These two are the least likely to have been taken. Besides, we have just destroyed his previous vessel. There are no mirrors in the Great Hall, so... She sighed heavily, then addressed Cassie. Come. It is not safe here. We must return to the inner sanctum as fast as possible. Pierce gritted his teeth, then snarled and dismissed the echoes. At the same time, Sunny felt the cold blade move away from his neck. In the next moment, the familiar sentinel appeared from the thin air beside him, holding a sharp dagger in her hand. She smiled and winked at him. Lucky you. Well, maybe next time. With that, the woman headed toward the group of the lost and beckoned for them to follow. Sunny briefly glanced at Cassie, sighed, and started walking. He wasn't too happy about how things had turned out, and knew that their conflict with the forces of valor was not over. But for now, at least, there seemed to be a shaky truce between them, which gave him an opportunity to get some answers.